Thanks for coming, guys. I guess the silence means that we're getting started. So yeah, thanks for making it to this wonderful presentation. We're really lucky to be joined by like some of the leading experts in this area, like the people that this area of unidentified anomalous phenomena and UFOs. It's been coming back into the news recently. There's all these congressional investigations. There's like these hearings, these videos that are coming out, this sensor data that's being reported by the Navy, by various other branches of the military. And it's really hard to know where to go with it. You like look up UFOs and aliens online, and there's a whole, if you've done that, you probably know that it's kind of a rabbit hole. But we're really lucky to be joined by some of the most credible people, I think, in the whole country talking about this issue. So we got, there's a lot of transparency legislation going on. So Chuck Schumer, Mike Rounds, there's bipartisan transparency legislation afoot, and there's whistleblower investigations, and we're lucky to be joined by the people that are like behind the scenes working on that and really doing like a lot of work like behind the scenes and like lobbying Congress and to teach us more about this subject. So we're happy to be joined by the Disclosure Foundation. We got Jordan Flowers, the executive director, Dylan Guthrie, the co-founder, Kirk McConnell on the advisory board. And we have Brady-Estevez joining us as well, former Yale PhD student. So I'll give it to Jordan, and then we'll get going then.
Thank you so much. Hey everybody, my name is Jordan Flowers. I'm the executive director of the Disclosure Foundation. A little bit of background about myself and about the organization. So I had a background in finance and investing on Wall Street, also did some consulting work, and then in the past couple of years I've been doing more entrepreneurial projects. I was one of these people who read the 2017 New York Times article about this subject and really had a reflexive reaction that there's a there, and that this was important and something worth paying attention to. I didn't know what the truth was, but I thought the truth was important and worthy of my time. So I've been spending a significant amount of my professional time on the subject. Our organization is a 501c3, the Disclosure Foundation, and we try to focus on 3 core lines of effort. So we have a policy research function or line of effort. Think of that as like a think tank. We try and work with Congress to develop policy to deal with this subject. The second line of effort is a legal one. So we have a team of lawyers that's able to submit FOIA requests, pursue FOIA litigation if it requires that, to provide whistleblower consultation and representation as well. And then other investigatory capabilities from the lawyers for trying to really have a precise legal perspective for the subject. There's a lot of interesting legal aspects to this and overlapping with national security as well. Our co-founder and advisory board member, Dylan Guthrie, is going to step up in a second to talk a little bit about the history of that and the implications, and it's fascinating. The third leg of the stool that we do as an organization is public education. So this would be a perfect example, right? We want to be having this conversation with everyone we can and different centers of power. We go meet with Congress. We want to be here in academic institutions to talk about this and take this seriously. We also want to talk with Silicon Valley. There's economic possibilities and economic risks associated with this subject, and Wall Street as well. And we've been fortunate to find partners that are open-minded. This topic clearly has a history of having a stigma associated with it, but what I've been pleasantly surprised by is that when we go into these different environments, whether Wall Street or Congress, Silicon Valley, this subject is being taken seriously by serious people. And part of our education mission is to continue to expand that. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience as well who have really been instrumental in making that happen, and so I want to say thank you. That's all I have for now. That's a bit of an introduction to us. So I'd like to hand the mic over to our first speaker, Dylan Guthrie, to make his presentation. Shri, should I hang this up on, or just hand it over?
Can you turn off these overhead lights right over the screen?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dylan Guthrie. I'm a co-founder of the Disclosure Foundation, and as Jordan had said, I'm a member of its advisory board. I'm presently an attorney in Washington, D.C., and I've been working on this topic both on policy issues and some legal questions for around the past 5 or 6 years now. We're going to try to keep this very informal. If I run over time, it doesn't look like there's any sort of vaudevillian hook to drag me off stage, so please just give some signal if we're pressed for time, and I'll hastily conclude the presentation. But I am interested in just seeing who in the audience has any familiarity with this topic, whether you're coming to this for the first time. Anyone new to the UFO, or UAP as we call it now, subject, or are you all fairly well initiated into the topsy-turvy nature of this? Okay. The other thing I'd like to see made clear is the disclaimer. As a lawyer, I love my disclaimers, and so I'm going to read this aloud. And the disclaimer is thus: the views expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect those of the Disclosure Foundation or any other institution or other person. Nothing contained in this presentation constitutes legal advice or is intended to form an attorney-client relationship. So here's our roadmap. This is what I'd like to discuss for the balance of the time. The UAP subject is vexing, it is fascinating, and it's been going on for some time now. There are, however, I think a few challenges associated with this topic that have not been given as much attention as I would like to see given to them. And so we're going to spend some time talking about the hard national security issues involved with this topic, and why it is that this enmeshment of national security with UAP, whatever they might be, has proven so resilient to the disclosure movement. And I'll also give some thoughts about what it is that we, and by we I mean you, could help to do about that. This is not simply a spectator sport. This is a topic that I believe is perhaps the most important, or one of the most important issues of our time. And the fact that you're here means that you're interested in it. I'd like to see if you are so moved to have that interest turn into action. And perhaps at the end of this presentation, you will be so moved. Jordan already gave an overview of the Disclosure Foundation, who we are, what we do. The gentleman, though, at the very top house left of the presentation is Christopher Mellon. He's the chairman of the board of directors of our organization. And for those of you who don't know Christopher Mellon, he's a wonderful man, and the disclosure movement would not be where it is today without him. He's the former Deputy Assistant Director of Defense for Intelligence. He was at one time as well the staff director of the minority staff of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and he was instrumental in having provided to the public these 3 famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, videos of UAP captured by naval aviators beginning in November 2004 off a U.S. aircraft carrier as it was on training maneuvers off the California coast. And since Chris helped to have those videos disclosed to the public in the form of the 2017 New York Times article that Jordan had referenced in his opening remarks, the disclosure movement as we know it today has been remarkably different and also more successful than it has been at any time before. But that success is not irreversible. Jordan is our executive director. Anna Brady-Estevez, to his right, is a Yale graduate and a member of our advisory board. Next to her is Professor Avi Loeb, a professor of astronomy at Harvard University. And then Lester Nare, our director of operations at the foundation. And then Kirk McConnell, who you'll be hearing from later this evening. We've done a few things. We've drafted a number of policy briefs, legal analyses, running the gamut of issues relating to congressional oversight, which we'll get into in a little bit. Complexities around the declassification of classified information, which could be the subject of its own presentation, although I would suspect many of you would be asleep by halfway through it. And then there's the other issue of domain awareness. And what I'll say there is that UAP are often conflated with other things in the airspace, as well as undersea and potentially in space. And without being able to distinguish among those different objects or phenomena, our response will also be conflated or muddled and therefore ineffective. A little bit about me. As I've said, I'm an attorney. I'm the co-founder of this organization and a member of its advisory board. I've written a few things on the topic as well, most recently a law journal article in the Harvard National Security Journal, which is a crisp 72 pages if anyone really wants to dive into complexities around some of the statutes and other legislative action that Congress has been taking over the last few years. And then I'm also, like Kirk, a former staffer on the Hill. I worked on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and was also a foreign policy and national security aide to then Senator John Kerry. This is the question no one has answered. Without taking account of the national security implications of this issue, we're not going to get very far. And yet, there has been no public discussion about whether UAP, and I want to stress certain UAP, or some subset of UAP, may or may not be a threat to our national security. When we say threat, we need to be careful about what we're talking. Intelligence products are primarily the result of two things, the capabilities and the intentions of the object for intelligence collection. There's a third element, depending on whom you ask, which is opportunity, which is not inherent in the thing about which you're collecting intelligence, but is instead a systemic factor. But when you look at the capabilities that have been described by our very own government in talking about some UAP, and UAP, just for those of you who are new to the topic, it stands for Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena. There's been a number of semantical shifts over the last 80-odd years. Unidentified anomalous phenomena is the definition that Congress has codified into U.S. law. Before that, Congress had used a slightly related term called unidentified aerial phenomena, but had changed the middle initial to anomalous to account for some interesting things. Anyone have a guess as to why we changed aerial to anomalous? Eric?
Transmedium.
Transmedium. What do we think that means?
It can go through all states of matter and perhaps different dimensions.
Isn't that cool to everybody? UAP are not simply observed in the air. They're not called flying saucers anymore for much the same reason. They were called flying saucers briefly in the 1940s, but the Air Force then changed the term to the much more familiar UFOs, and that change also was intentional. The Air Force recognized that UFOs, as they were then called, have come in other shapes than just saucer-shaped. And so flying saucer was inaccurate. And the term was changed from flying saucer to UFO to account for that shift. Just so today we now have UAP for anomalous rather than aerial. And amongst people who are familiar with this topic, UAP are characterized by what were the once 5, but now the 6 observables. These being instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocity, low observability, by which we mean the ability of UAP to cloak itself either through passive or active jamming. We also have something called positive lift, which some people call anti-gravity. I've been told by physicists, though, to not use the phrase anti-gravity because gravity is not a force. I'm still not sure what gravity is or isn't, but that's not my area. The key about that 4th observable, though, is that these UAP, and you see one pictured on a gun camera to the right there, it doesn't seem to have wings or control surfaces and yet is able to stay aloft and to exhibit these other rapidly shifting capabilities, acceleration, low observability. Eric was talking about transmedium travel. UAP can, in some instances, move from the space to the air to the water domains without any apparent loss in their performance capabilities, which is very interesting. And then the most recent of these observables is called biological effects. And the basic idea there is that certain UAP seem to have physical effects on the environment and close observers of the objects themselves. One of the more common traits of a UAP is to leave what looks to be like burnt grass at a site of an alleged landing. And perhaps more worryingly, there are service members and others who have come into proximity with these craft and have something resembling traumatic brain injury, burns. In some cases, those individuals have died. The other component of what constitutes an intelligence assessment are the intentions of UAP. And as unclear as the capabilities might be to our known scientific methods, the intentions are even less clear. We don't know, at least publicly, how many phenomena we're dealing with. There is a theory advanced by Jacques Vallée that some of these phenomena could be masking themselves in different shapes and forms to observers, and yet underneath these different masks, there could be one phenomenon. We don't know. Other intentions. In the early 1950s, an Air Force general in an alleged memorandum described the behavior of UAP primarily as evasive. As the encounters by the U.S. Navy in November 2004, and perhaps to the present day, make clear, some UAP seem to understand the rules of military engagement. We haven't, to our knowledge, gotten into a firefight with any. They seem to know when naval aviators approach them, like Commander David Fravor did in November 2004, to move away, to not prompt a kinetic exchange. And that itself is interesting. Yes. And we also see that certain UAP seem to have an intense interest in not only U.S., but also foreign nuclear, military, high-tech, and other sensitive facilities. There's a documentary that will be coming out, I think, tomorrow, Age of Disclosure. There will be credible people, high-ranking officials, members of Congress, talking about the interest of UAP in nuclear facilities. Despite that, and your comments, however, we've seen historically that official accounts have either entirely dismissed the existence of UAP, but have also dismissed their constituting any threat. In the top right, we have former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, who called UAP in testimony before the House Foreign Affairs Committee illusions, and stated in no uncertain terms that they pose no, not even potential threat to our security. An earlier CIA assessment stated that these phenomena do not constitute, at least by indication, any, quote, direct physical threat to national security. And then, simply because we're at a university, I thought it appropriate to cite to Dr. Edward Condon's Condon report, where he not only dismissed that anything of use had come from the scientific study of UAP, but he strongly encouraged teachers, which would include professors, to discourage their students from getting any credit for schoolwork or other activities showing an interest in UAP. I hope that we can do some credit to Dr. Condon by ignoring that advice completely. Today, however, the topic and the position of the U.S. government has changed. We have a busy slide here. I'm not going to spend that much time on it, but you see both in binding U.S. law, 50 U.S.C. section 3373C5, that the law of the land has ordered the now Department of War to evaluate the potential threat that UAP might present to the national security of the United States. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence had expressed concern that UAP may pose a challenge to U.S. national security. A similar concern was voiced by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence in a 2021 preliminary report on UAP, and other elements of the national security establishment have portrayed a similar inclination. One of the offices in the now Department of War that has an active role in this is called the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, which was an office established in the Pentagon by legislative passage, thanks to Senator Gillibrand and others. There is, some of you might not be aware, but there is an office within the War Department that is specifically tasked with synthesizing all data relating to UAP, analyzing that data, and in theory reporting to Congress about that data. AARO has not, though, despite that statutory mandate we saw in the earlier slide, AARO has not, at least publicly, evaluated any potential of UAP threat. And in fact, in the most recent reports, AARO didn't even broach the topic. In a somewhat earlier report, we get a interesting formulation that none of the reports suggest that UAP pose, quote, a direct threat, not to the national security, but to the flight safety of the observing aircraft. That's not exactly what it was tasked to do, and so it answered a question that was not posed to it. And then at the very bottom here, we have a quote of the U.S. Air Force that's on its website. The last time I checked it was about a week ago. The Air Force has not apparently updated its website and continues to state that no UAP ever indicated any threat to our national security. So we've got a problem. We have statements over decades that seem to be somewhat inconsistent with each other. We have laws that require a threat evaluation. No threat evaluation has been made, at least publicly. That's a problem. And it needs to be solved. We've got a somewhat muddled slide here. I apologize. But as we talk about different legislative approaches to the UAP issue, there's the UAP Disclosure Act. There are various attempts by senators and other members of Congress to legislate in this topic. I believe that one pressing need that we have is to answer for the American people whether the intelligence community believes that UAP or certain UAP may pose a threat to the national security. If the answer is no, then that's more knowledge than we had yesterday. And if the answer is yes, then the American people have a right to know. The second interesting challenge we have is that everyone seems to be secretive about UAP. Every nation state, every presidential administration, despite changes of administrations over time. The office has been occupied by people of remarkably different political philosophies and temperament, and yet it seems that almost to a 1, they've acted the same way, even though certain presidents, before they became president, were very much interested in this topic. Famously, President Carter, President Ford, when he was a member of Congress, represented the district that Alan Hynek, during the Project Blue Book days, visited and dismissed a UAP sighting as swamp gas, which incensed Congressman Ford to no end and led him to want to hold hearings on the topic. And yet, when Ford became president, we didn't hear anything. Why is that? Why, too, if there are so-called aliens, haven't they revealed themselves? Everyone seems to be keeping secret in the same way, which is interesting. I've never seen a UFO. I'm not trying to create evidence out of thin air, but if we are to assess what that might look like, we can create a very simple game that resembles other games using very simple game theory. And there are 2 binary choices here. There's disclose and there's don't disclose. The US has that option, and any of those other players do as well. And because any of those other players do, we can say that this game is player invariant. The identities don't seem to matter. Notice as well that I'm not saying that there are or aren't aliens, only that there's something there, and so we're being, I believe, ontologically parsimonious. I'm not introducing new entities without necessity, in the language of Occam. And then I'd also say again that this game seems to be multilateral. So most games involve bilateral or 2-player choices. Here, however, because so many other players exist and have acted the same way, we can say that the game seems to be multilateral. And we can add some values. Again, these are not empirically tested values. This is simply a paradigm. You could introduce other values in this table, and those other values would say different things. But we can say with some more certainty, however, that all players, or at least all knowledgeable players, have elected don't disclose. And we should give some solicitude to that decision. Why is it that they've all acted in the same way? Do people usually act against their immediate perceived self-interest, or can we assume with some danger to our thinking that we have rational actors here? They've all acted the same way. We then introduce some values for unilateral disclosure. We can see from, again, these are simply asserted values. Other values can be inserted, and the game will say different things. But we can, through this heuristic, we can see that much like in an arms race, there can be disincentives to be the first player, so to speak, to disclose or to reveal your own technology. There is often, rather than a first mover advantage, a second mover advantage, because the player against whom some advanced technology is revealed then has the option themselves of revealing or not revealing their own technology. And there is value in that optionality itself. Lastly, we have this very interesting box at the top, which is this mutually disclose option. And we've got, in vernacular, we have positive and negative values here. Again, I don't want to get caught up on the specific values. The intent here is to simply show that there's some band of uncertainty, +2, -2, because we don't know whether, in the event that there is mutual disclosure, whether we will get to a more stable state and whether that state will benefit one or other player. But in this case, if we just apply expected values, we'll show that the expected value of +2 and -2 would be 1. And so we've got a tie with don't disclose. And so we see that we're at somewhat of a stalemate here, and we have been for some time. When I asked what kind of game is this, it seems that the disclosure game is nearly identical to what others in the literature have called the secret arms race game, where the disclose and don't disclose options are replaced with reveal or conceal. And there's been an enormous amount of literature in international relations and game theory, which I don't pretend to have mastered by any stretch. It gets extremely complicated very quickly. But suffice to say that the game seems to look like an arms race. What we haven't discussed, though, is whether this game is what we might describe as multi-level. And game theory and multiple levels in that game most often mean that there is a domestic constituency that can affect negotiating options in international relations. The famous political scientist Robert Putnam called that level 1, which is the international negotiation, and then level 2 is domestic constituencies driving the political decision-making at the international negotiating table, which creates this potential for a multi-level game. And if we take the very brief example of the 7 Years' War, we see here this vast contest for empire across the globe involving indigenous peoples. And in the United States, one of the most important of those indigenous peoples were the Iroquois Confederacy. Well, if we were the Iroquois, how would we have knowledge of this grander game going on? Is there a grander game going on, and how would that affect our own decision-making? And conversely, if we are the British or the French or the American colonists in this illustration, how much would we want to reveal to other players of that game? How does that affect our thinking? In the arms race game, the winning move, although the question can be close, is to pretend there is no game at all. And that might perhaps approximate what international relations today look like around this topic. Ordinarily, you would suspect that a game with this many players and existing at this many levels would be extremely unstable. And yet, for the last 80 years, we've had, with some notable exceptions, a fairly stable state of secrecy. That seems to be changing, and we should ask why. Historically, secret technologies are disclosed because of great power competition. Which leads us to our next challenge: arms control and nonproliferation. I was speaking with someone about the quote here that precedes this section, and while I don't want to be a fact or science witness to the statement, there at least seems to be some thinking that the power output by some UAP might, quote, exceed the total nuclear power production of the United States by more than a factor of 10. What are the implications of that? How about another thought experiment? Put yourself right after World War II. You can be in the US Air Force, or you can be in the Soviet Air Forces. It'd have to be after 1947 for the US Air Force, which wasn't formed until then. If you're in the US Air Force and you see a UAP demonstrating beyond next generation performance capabilities, you might have some thoughts. You might reason that if that's Soviet technology, we may as well pack it up because the Cold War is over. And yet the Cold War seems to still be going on, so you might reasonably conclude that it's not Soviet technology. You then might reason that the Soviets could be seeing these just as well and thinking similarly, presuming that we are all, after all, rational actors. And if the Soviets are observing UAP and thinking that they are US technology, then the Cold War is over for them as well. But it wasn't over. The Cold War would endure for decades after then. But what they do, both sides have, is this proof of concept. You have power outputs and technology that seems to far outstrip presently known capabilities, and you might wonder whether you too could employ those capabilities against your own rivals. If it's a typical game, a bilateral or multilateral game existing at one level, then an arms race is the typical outcome, right? Two powers compete to get the atomic bomb and then develop the atomic bomb as quickly after, or to steal the atomic bomb from the other power in order to compete. But if the game is multi-level, are the implications different? And again, we don't need to necessarily postulate new entities here, but if we can run another thought experiment of how would North Korea or Iran react if the US were to unveil the existence of such a technology, you can immediately grasp that there would be enormous challenges to the already fraying nonproliferation regime, that the US would be put in the position of having to put the genie back in the bottle, as it were. It would face a potential challenge from these so-called rogue states that they might themselves try to develop their own illicit UAP programs, because why would you want to develop a nuclear capability if you could get this instead? And then if the US were to disclose that it had this the entire time, there's also then this question of how would the US be viewed? Would it be meeting its obligations under international law? Or would it face allegations that it is itself another rogue state? Often the question in nonproliferation is this concept around can a particular power get breakout capability? Can it get a bomb? And can it get the bomb quickly enough so that its attainment of that kind of capability is accepted by the international community before they can mobilize? This is a distinct concept from effective breakout, which refers not to simply obtaining one atomic or nuclear bomb, but enough of that weapon in order to pose an effective deterrent against powers that would seek to deprive that country of that capability. So if you look at North Korea, for instance, do they have effective breakout or not? It's something of a gray area, and that poses challenges. It can create both stability and instability at times, depending on what the informational asymmetries are. And without answering the question, I'd like at least to ask it to all of you to think about, which is, did the United States blunder by disclosing the existence of the atomic bomb in 1945? This is a distinct question from whether we are morally wrong for having used it. This relates simply to the disclosing of it. It's an interesting question. UAP capabilities, as we discussed in prior slides, involve hypersonic velocity, instantaneous acceleration. They could be thought of in one way as a souped-up version of a hypersonic missile. Does that then represent a first strike capability against one's own nuclear arsenal? And if so, how might that destabilize the current nuclear deterrents that are in place by the world's powers today? Would this be a threat to stability? Or if multiple powers have attained this sort of capability, would it actually result in effective deterrence and continued stability? Until now, we've talked about how these sorts of statements are thought experiments only, but I would like to direct all of your attention to recent statements by senior officials within our government. The first statement is by the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Quote, "Our technologies permit us to manipulate time and space." President Trump, "We have weaponry that nobody has any idea what it is." The director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, he is no longer the director of that office, but when he was interviewed by ABC News' Devin Dwyer. Sean Kirkpatrick expressed concern about adversary technical surprise or extraterrestrial technical surprise. And then a member of Congress, Representative Eric Burleson, emerging from a classified briefing in the Capitol on UAP, gave these remarks, What it appears to be is someone has discovered something, some advanced form of propulsion or technology. The good news is that we can already blow up the world, and we haven't yet. And if the upside is that we can do it more efficiently, well, we've already sort of set the floor there. Many people talk about how mastering this alleged UAP technology could provide limitless clean energy, and while that is certainly an enticing prospect, I would also say that our problems on that front are not primarily technological, but economical and relating to security as well. There are nuclear nonproliferation concerns that have prevented the peaceful proliferation of civilian nuclear technology under 123 agreements and other frameworks. Civilian nuclear power has not been miniaturized. You don't have it in your car for good reason. And then other problems are technological. Some of you might be familiar with the concept of energy transmission load loss, which leads to the regionalization of electrical markets, regardless of what the ultimate power source is. If it's 10x, 100x, you're still going to lose a lot of that over vast distances. There's the energy storage problem. And so we might not have the benefits that some people assume when they talk about some new kind of propulsion or energy source. We've also spent a bit of time about how disclosure could spark an arms race, but the silver lining there is that we've had international strategic frameworks since the beginning of the Cold War that have governed that tension. It is both terrifying but also stabilizing. We've talked about how breakout can lead to an increase in tensions, but how effective breakout can actually stabilize relations. And so we have this dilemma, in a sense, but I believe that when we're faced with the unknown, it's more important than ever to seek some kind of comfort in our existing intellectual frameworks and to draw on that history and that intelligence of our own in order to chart the way forward. And so I would encourage you all to sort of think about what sources you can draw on to help try to grapple with these problems. I know I'm probably over time already, but I would like to spend a few minutes on another topic, which is this very thorny set of problems around handling of classified information, sources of that classified information, and what Congress can do with that information if it's able to get it. I would say again that I'm not offering legal advice and that these are my own personal views only. As many of you might be aware, there have been a bevy of whistleblowers and other potential sources of classified information who have testified before the Congress and made other public statements alleging the existence of secret UAP intelligence collection, crash retrieval, and reverse engineering programs. And yet, despite those allegations, many of those individuals seem to be under the belief that they cannot provide the classified kernels of that information to Congress behind closed doors. We're not talking about in public session here. And many of these sources cite fears of, among other things, prosecution, civil lawsuits, primarily for violating non-disclosure agreements, and also employment retaliation for sources who are either current government employees or government contractors. The result of those statements, oddly, is to dissuade similarly situated persons from coming forward. Because if you repeat something long enough and loudly enough, others tend to believe it. But it is my opinion that these statements expressing fears of prosecution and civil lawsuit, although not employment retaliation, which we'll get to, are largely incorrect. In fact, to my knowledge, no one has ever been prosecuted under the Espionage Act or other federal laws for disclosing classified information to Congress behind closed doors. The executive branch has occasionally claimed to the contrary, There's one memo from the mid-90s there. But other than that, claiming that a 100-plus-year-old statute is unconstitutional, although it survived for that long, the executive branch has not taken action against individuals for sharing information with Congress in this way, at least not under the criminal laws. Similarly, no individual, to my knowledge, has ever been sued for violating a non-disclosure, also called a confidentiality agreement, for sharing classified information with Congress behind closed doors. And in fact, we see here, just looking at the set and public forms of the government's own non-disclosure agreements governing persons having access to classified information, that those agreements expressly permit disclosure of information to the Congress. This one is real. Employment retaliation. While in general the classification decisions by the executive branch are not binding on Congress or the federal courts, employees who disclose information to Congress without leave of the executive are still going against what the orders are of their boss, the president or the president's delegates in the executive branch. Those instances of retaliation have occurred. They are supposedly rare, but they are real. And so one question that many people have been dealing with is, how is it that these individuals can be brought to the Congress, assuming they can become comfortable with the other two risks? How can they be shepherded in a way to the legislature so that they can disclose this information without losing their own livelihoods? I would note that the federal courts could decide these questions, but have not. Many people have expressed frustration at the courts refraining from entering the fray and deciding in a variety of cases whether Congress has the better claim to get the information or the executive branch has the better claim to keep it. And the judiciary has thought it best to leave that question to this tug of war between the two political branches and to not assert binding law in the area to resolve it. That can be an opportunity, however, because if Congress simply obtains this information, then their having gotten that information will likely not be adjudicated by a court. Whereas if the executive simply keeps the information, their keeping it will likely not be adjudicated by a court either. And we see in this case that the courts have done exactly that. There's this two famous cases involving wiretaps by a national security agency. I believe it was the FBI, possibly the NSA at the time. And a House Commerce subcommittee issued subpoenas to a telecom carrier to give to the Congress, to that committee, information about those wiretaps. And that committee issued subpoenas in order to compel the production of that evidence. The Department of Justice intervened, seeking to quash that subpoena, and the courts simply said to the two branches, work it out. Come back to us if you can't work it out. And in that second case, they came back to the courts, and the courts said, no, for real this time, go work it out. The effect of that, however, is that congressional subpoenas might not be enforced. And so one of the considerations around this topic is whether it is better to simply get the information without a subpoena, or whether it could be advisable in some instances to issue a subpoena but run the risk that that subpoena might not get enforced, because that itself will send a message to other persons who have that kind of information about the powers of the committee issuing that subpoena. And I will say here that the House Commerce Subcommittee does not traditionally subpoena the national security agencies. And so there is this additional complexity around which body in Congress is attempting to exert oversight. Is it the Intelligence Committee? Is it the Armed Services Committee? Or is it a committee that is something of a newcomer to the field and might not have that well-established relationship and political heft to exercise oversight of the agency in question? I know that I'm over time here, but I believe I've discussed most of this slide already. Here we see a famous image of Senator Frank Church, who convened the Church Committee in the Senate. I think he's holding there a poison dart gun used by some intelligence agency in its assassinations program. Surely that gun was classified, and yet we see a member of Congress disclosing it there for the American people. That was the point of the Church Committee, which then evolved into the current Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And on that, I would say that members of Congress have repeatedly disclosed classified information to the American people. They have done so intentionally at times and in the name of transparency and reform. Although the bounds of this disclosure by members of Congress have not been tested, it has been asserted that they have immunity under the Constitution for disclosing that kind of information in the performance of their official functions. The thrust, though, of this discussion is to show that Congress can investigate quite well, and that fewer members of Congress are needed to investigate a topic within the executive branch or elsewhere than are needed to pass legislation. It takes a lot of members of Congress to pass legislation. In the Senate, it often takes a supermajority in order to get cloture. But here we see a motivated senator with a few friends bringing transparency, bringing disclosure, bringing oversight without necessarily needing that kind of political capital to pass legislation. And in fact, passing legislation without having first gotten all of the facts can itself present problems. You know, members of Congress traditionally are risk averse. They are successful politicians. That is how they got there. That is how they maintain their positions. And they are often not in the mood to vote on things about which they do not have information. And while I do support various bills relating to UAP transparency, I believe that pursuing this fact-finding endeavor by members of Congress has the prospect of being more productive, although it certainly has challenges as well. I'm almost finished. Our last challenge, to sum up, the other challenges are that UAP were dismissed as illusions and presenting no threat. There's now law on the books requiring a threat evaluation, and yet 24 years after 9/11, involving colossal loss of life, an epic breakdown in the intelligence community, and objects in our airspace, there's been no public evaluation whether UAP pose a threat. Second challenge is that UAP disclosure seems to resemble an arms race. The third issue is that there have been statements by top officials within our country alluding to secret technologies, which then raise proliferation and arms control concerns. And then the fourth challenge is that similarly, UAP disclosure to the Congress appears to be stymied on national security grounds as well, despite the absence of any clear legal restraint against sharing that information with the Congress. The common ingredient, unidentified anomalous phenomena. That might not strike anyone as strange, but I would suggest that we have somewhat followed a red herring here. By focusing on UAP, we are focusing on technologies. We are focusing in an area that raises, I think, legitimate national security concerns. And I would wonder whether we might be better suited by instead focusing on the prospect of non-human intelligence instead. I have to confess that I'm not particularly interested in the technology myself. As an attorney, I wouldn't be able to make any sense of it if it were presented in front of me, but I am fascinated by the prospect of learning from another culture or civilization. I am eager to know what sorts of consequences there might be for the arts and the sciences. And I would say that there is precedent for that as well. And you don't have to look very far. You know, we have a lot of knowledge of other cultures in this world. We know much about Russian and Chinese philosophy and literature, and yet there is not broad-based knowledge amongst the American public about their secret weapons programs. We've somehow been able to learn of the existence of another culture and people without blowing ourselves up. And similarly, as Jordan pointed out to me, the discovery of the atomic and microbial worlds did not lead to disseminated knowledge broadly across our cultures of atomic and biological weapons. I'm not going to pretend that teasing out these different concepts will be easy. There will be an enormous amount of overlap. But I believe that to the extent words matter, and they do matter, that we are somewhat doing ourselves a disservice by focusing on obviously sensitive areas within the government, which is not to say that there should not be greater congressional oversight of those programs. There should be. But whether there should be broader disclosure to the American public about those sensitive technologies, I believe, is a different matter. What I do believe should be disclosed, if there is indeed existence of it, is non-human intelligence. And I believe that we can apply something of the frameworks that we have with other cultures and in other discoveries with that prospect as well. So I will close here, and I will thank you very much for your time. And I would like to quote the words of a poet, perhaps more literally than he would have liked at the time. This is Kenneth Koch, a famous New York poet. And he said, the opening up of freedom takes place in steps. First one speaks of the ocean, then of the boats, then of the people on the boats, lastly of their ideas. Perhaps we have been speaking about the boats for too long. Thank you.
So thank you guys. That was a really great talk. I think we're running a bit slow, so we're going to save questions we're just going to move on to the next fireside chat. So we have a really amazing chat coming up with Kirk McConnell and Jordan Flowers moderating. So Kirk was like in the room like during the whistleblower investigations when David Grush was coming out a couple years ago. Is Kirk around right now? Or? Oh, there we go. Yeah, so there. I was looking for you behind the lectern. So, all right, so we're gonna give it up to Jordan and Kirk. So. Yeah.
Thank you. So just one mic, right?
Yeah.
For now, okay. Thanks so much, everybody. Dylan, thank you for an amazing talk. The depth of thinking there is really critically important, and I know it's a lot, but it's really good to get these ideas out there and for them to sink in. So thank you again. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sitting here with Kirk McConnell. I know Kirk has been introduced. Kirk, I'd like you to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you came to be involved in this, and some of the comments you've made previously about the potential existence of some of these programs I think we'd like to hear about. So I'm going to hand the mic over to you. We only have one mic for now, so I'm going to hand this over to you, but I think that's a good place to start.
Well, first, let me say that my memory's not very good, and I certainly need notes on various topics, so I hope you'll indulge me in that. I retired from Congress about 18 months ago. I spent my really entire adult life up there, 37 years as a staffer for various national security committees, mostly the Senate Armed Services Committee, but I also spent 13 years combined on the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee. I handled an awful lot of topics over that period of time. It sort of changed as as priorities and technologies changed, but I was involved with intelligence matters for that entire 37-year period. When cyber became a thing, I took that over. I've always done information technology and some other advanced technologies. In addition, I looked at organization and management, management reforms and the like in the executive branch and the national security agencies. Jordan asked, what about UFOs? I mean, you're looking at someone who, until 2017, when the New York Times did their seminal piece on the old ATIP OSAP program, I was a committed reductionist materialist, I guess you would say. All things about psychic phenomenon, and certainly, something as strange as UFOs, I was pretty dismissive of and didn't pay any attention to. When I can assure you that things have changed now. I mean, I've been sort of grabbed by the scruff of the neck by this issue, and stage by stage by stage, I've gradually adjusted my thinking to like, damn, this is real, and it's really difficult to get your head around that, especially if you've been convinced, committedly convinced that it was baloney, before that. So the New York Times article came out. It had quite a bit of what I would call actionable information in it, and we very quickly learned about some of the people who were behind those revelations. It turns out that some of them I had known for a long time, Chris Mellon being a prime example. I'd known him even at that time, 20 plus years. So we started, a group of us on the Senate Armed Services Committee and a small group on the Senate Intelligence Committee at the staff level, started pulling the thread on various strands that came out of the New York Times articles, and then connecting with Chris Mellon and Lou Elizondo and Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis and a lot of the other figures that you guys probably know by now. We started interviewing people and interviewing Navy pilots. And we started getting briefings and reading the vast literature that's out there on this topic. And slowly but surely, we became convinced that there was a there. And so, that's the origin story, not just for me, but for other colleagues on the committee. And we, of course, went on to work with members and arrange briefings and memoranda for the senators that we work for. And we ended up writing and passing several pieces of legislation in both the annual National Defense Authorization Acts as well as the Intelligence Authorization Acts. Not all of that legislation has led to anything notable. If I had it to do over again, I would tell you now that I would do it very differently in hindsight, but that's maybe something for another time to discuss.
Sure. Thanks, Kirk. I've heard you in other environments talk about your confidence level that a crash retrieval and reverse engineering program exists. How would you describe the probability there? Like, how confident are you in that? You described a little bit about how you've learned information. I think when people are at the dinner table talking about this topic, they encounter the question of what evidence is there? What would your answer be in that scenario?
Yeah, I would say that I'm personally very confident. I mean, it's hard to put a number on it, but 90-95%. And this derives from multiple strands, I guess. One, as Dylan has reviewed, and as you guys know just from reading the news, there have been a number of individuals who have come forward who have claimed to have had firsthand direct involvement in compartmented, hidden crash retrieval and reverse engineering efforts, as well as intelligence programs designed to detect and track UFOs, UAP, these are people who they were either current or former government officials and or contractors. They had high-level security clearances. They seemed perfectly sane. They had no incentive for risking their careers to come and talk to us about this. They gave strong testimony. Some of these individuals have never become public. They only told their stories in private, in confidence, so that the senators who have heard these reports have not even been allowed to share it with their other colleagues in the Senate. So that was a very powerful impetus for us to come around to the view that this is real. There's a lot of other sources who have come forward that do not claim direct firsthand involvement or knowledge, but who have interviewed a lot of people inside the Defense Department and the intelligence agencies who did have that direct involvement. So we've heard numbers, of people interviewed, multiple dozens. I mean, you've heard Dave Grush say this, and others besides Dave have told us this. Some of the people who you all may know publicly, I'm not going to name names because that's the point I'm trying to make here, is that they know more than they've let on publicly. And when Dylan talks about these people being afraid to disclose everything they know, even privately to Congress, it's because they're afraid for what's going to happen to them. There are so many ways to retaliate. I've seen it a lot in my career. Not for something as momentous as this, just for straying from orthodoxy. You'd be amazed how many times people's security clearances are threatened. It's a tremendous lever that the powers that be in these executive departments and agencies have over their employees. Well, the other thing that I would say is that my very long experience with the national security elements in the federal government is that they are very serious people. If they see something that that displays amazing characteristics, you can bet your ass they're going to research it and try to figure out what the hell it is. And especially, imagine this: back in World War II, there was this phenomenon known as Foo Fighters. You all may have heard about that. There's a band, the Foo Fighters, right? In World War II, when Allied air forces were roaming across Europe, they were followed and harassed and harried by these luminous orbs, just exactly the kind of things that are reported up to this day. They would track right along with the bombers and the fighters. They would circle around them. They had amazing flight characteristics and so on. We were convinced for a while that this was some amazing new Nazi technology. Likewise, these things were chasing the German aircraft, and the Germans were worried that we had some new amazing technology. These Foo Fighters showed up in the Pacific War as well, in our engagements with Japan. The United States, the Allies' intelligence services sent people over to Europe for the express purpose of trying to figure out what the hell these Foo Fighters were. This was serious, serious business. So you can't tell me that they would all just shrug and say, oh well, must be illusory. These things were seen over and over and over again. It may even go back farther than that. There was a reported UFO crash in Magenta, Italy in 1933. There's a fair amount written about this. And the famous CIA spy, James Angleton, with his father, was living in Magenta at the time, and quite possibly could have witnessed this event. The other strand is the interference that these UAP have executed with respect to our nuclear programs, both missile launches with either dummy warheads or real warheads. There's so many examples of this, them showing up at nuclear facilities, whether it's power plants or research facilities or testing facilities or what have you. There's a huge amount of reporting on that. Not to mention just all of the reports from citizens and government officials, police officers, firefighters, what have you, about witnessing crashes, landings, encounters, sightings, and the huge number of abductions that have been reported. So that's all of that is what gives me and others in the government confidence that this is real.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it, mostly because that is not a hypothetical question. My father-in-law is in the audience, and we have had this discussion. So I think that's important, and I'll make sure that he corners you after with any follow-up questions. We could talk a little bit next, I think, about the UAP Disclosure Act. The public may not generally be aware of this. This is a piece of legislation that has been put forward a few times. There are, just to educate this audience without being presumptuous about what you do or don't know about that, this piece of legislation essentially is driving towards transparency around this topic, setting up a review board for declassifying information, and it is co-sponsored by senior leadership, Senator Mike Rounds, Senator Chuck Schumer, names. It is bipartisan on each side, which is this issue may be one of the few bipartisan issues in Congress. Yes, and it's interesting.
Disclosure issue.
Yeah,
It is disclosure related.
the politics of the moment seems to favor disclosure and to favor transparency. Could you talk a little bit, and by the way, for the members of the public, this is a piece of legislation that mentions crash retrieval and, quote, legacy programs. This is a piece of legislation sponsored by senior leaders that mentions non-human intelligence dozens of times. So, Kirk, the question for you is, there has been challenges in getting this piece of legislation supported and pushed through. Different aspects of it have. Can you talk a little bit about what you think could help there? If more members of Congress had classified briefings, would that change the support level? And what you think other potential solutions may be if there's continued challenges and resistance there?
Well, this is a really complicated situation, and therefore complicated question and answer. The UAP Disclosure Act was very consciously modeled after the JFK Assassination Records Act of 1992, or maybe it was 93, I can't remember. And when I say closely modeled, I mean it was really, that was the foundation for marking up the Disclosure Act for UAP. As Jordan said, it would set up this review board of distinguished citizens who would be chosen by the president, but it would require Senate confirmation of these people. They would have to come from various disciplines of science and the arts. and politics and government, and the role of that board would be to make recommendations both to the president and to Congress, and to conduct investigations to try to get to ground truth about what the government knows and has accomplished in dealing with the UAP issue for these many decades. People have criticized the JFK Records Assassination Act. I mean, it took like 30 years, and we only recently got the last, records released. But it seemed like a pretty good model. I mean, it has worked to a significant extent. This is similar to the UAP problem. It's one that vexes a lot of the American people, and it has a lot of mysterious aspects. It had a lot of sensitive aspects. People weren't sure what the hell was in those files. What was it going to reveal about that would be embarrassing to the government and would cause angst amongst the American people, for all we knew. So it was put in place and structured in a way that would allow an orderly process. It wouldn't just allow the CIA to just say, no, I'm not releasing any more records. You can't keep them bottled up forever. It set up an independent body to advise the president and Congress about how to get to declassification and public release of these records, and this seems like a similar kind of problem. So Jordan mentioned that we haven't had much success, and we had the most. We've tried and failed with this legislation 3 times now, 3 years running. An attempt to put it attach it as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act. Each time it has been sponsored or co-sponsored by Majority Leader Schumer, now Minority Leader Schumer. So that's about as powerful a sponsor as you can get. It has been bipartisan in its sponsorship, but because this topic crosses into so many areas: intelligence, armed services, Department of Energy, the Judiciary Committee, Foreign Relations. There's so many committees that could claim some jurisdiction over this issue that no one committee in either the Senate or the House would have jurisdiction over this. And under the rules of the Senate, when you have an issue that spans multiple committees like this, you have 2 choices. You either sequentially refer it to committee after committee after committee after committee, and they mark it up, and so you end up with all these different versions of the bill, or you attach it as an amendment and have to another bill that's proceeding through the Senate, and then you debate it on the floor, and maybe you have a vote on it. Well, I don't know if you all have been watching the way Congress operates for the last decade, but getting a vote, a debate and a vote, even in the Senate, the world's greatest deliberative body, supposedly, we don't debate anything there anymore, and we rarely vote on things as amendments. But nonetheless, tied to this jurisdictional problem, that was the way this thing had to go. Now, when it's an amendment that has to gain unanimous consent to be included in a bill, basically any committee chairman or ranking member of any committee with jurisdiction can just veto it and kill it. The first year we introduced this, Senator Schumer successfully got it onto the National Defense Authorization Act, but the House of Representatives refused to accept it in conference. The last 2 years, we couldn't even get it attached to the Senate version of the National Defense Authorization Act. Now, it's tempting to say, well, the Senate didn't like the bill, or the House didn't like the bill, as though it were a real collective action. That's really not accurate. It was individual senators who were going to determine the fate of this thing. at least to the point where it gets it would reach a conference issue. And I'm not at liberty to talk about how those individual players conducted themselves, but suffice to say that it was not an institutional judgment about the merits or demerits of that legislation, nor was it really about the quality of the evidence that supported the conclusion that legislation like this was needed. So is there a better way? Dylan suggested that maybe we need to think about alternative ways to get legislation passed to get at the disclosure problem. And I think that may well be true. But there is a lot of momentum. I just have to say, I don't want the world to be discouraged by the fact that this legislation has failed 3 times. There's still a lot of interest and energy behind this, and we're still beating the bushes to get more evidence to come out. And we see private sector groups now forming to not wait for the government to give them an answer, to go get the answer themselves. Scientific efforts, efforts to detect these things and track them and characterize them have sprung up. You see also the so-called experiencer or abductee community becoming a little more vocal and pressing for attention to their experiences and what's happened to them. So there's a lot of interesting movement by civil society, if you will, towards reducing the stigma, studying this phenomena, and not waiting for the government to tell us what they know. I don't know if that gets at everything.
No, I think that's great. And there's...
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it reminded me, Jordan, that you asked about more hearings and classified hearings. Certainly, members, the basic problem here is that neither the House nor the Senate do you have a critical mass of members who are really convinced that there's a there, right? Dylan pointed out that these people don't usually risk their reputations chasing crazy things, right? It's a way to get defeated in your next election. So they really like to have confidence before they dive into something in a very serious way. Historically, in my opinion, you see congressional investigations that are like, no kidding, they're not going to be denied. They're going to push through to the end. They're going to get the answers they're looking for. You think about Watergate, the Church Pike committees, Iran-Contra, things like that. What those things had in common is that by the time that those investigations really got momentum behind them, the members were looking around and saying, "Oh yeah, there's a story here. It's clear." They already knew that the end goal was a prize. I say a prize or a disaster, but you know what I'm trying to say. And I don't think we have that yet in either chamber. One way to get that is to have a lot more primary sources, firsthand direct sources, but we're stuck there for the reasons that Dylan has articulated. Fear of retaliation. Whistleblower protections are not at all what they need to be. But at the same time, it's hard to get more whistleblower protections until Congress has reached the tipping point where they think that this is really real, So this is a problem with more classified hearings, is you can try to get people there, but how much are they going to tell you? And if you don't protect them, they're probably not going to want to come, and they're probably not going to want to tell you anything. So we've got some chicken and egg problems, and some catch-22 kinds of situations to work through. But I think that we'll ultimately get there. Whistleblower protection legislation is another thing that should be pursued. Frankly, there's a lot of, I think, sentiment amongst advocates for disclosure about a truth and reconciliation process, the way South Africa approached its coming to terms with its apartheid history, in which you just got immunity as long as you tell the truth. You were going to be absolved of any criminal activities. So these are the kinds of things that Congress also needs to be pursuing. I'll leave it at that.
I think the point around whistleblowers is really important. Part of what our organization has tried to do, which was evidenced in Dylan's presentation, is break this problem down. It's complicated, disaggregate it into the risk of legal prosecution, the retaliation, and then if there's harm to people's physical safety. There's a lot of narrative out there about what whistleblowers can and can't do. What is your reaction to you were a co-author on this policy memo. What would you like to communicate to try and provide clarity about the perspective of this narrative that people can't come in and say what they would like to say?
Yes, Dylan brought this up at the end of his presentation as well. This idea that whistleblowers, most of them have, they're convinced by the constant drumbeat of the security establishment in the executive branch that if they tell Congress about something like this, what they know, that they're going to get prosecuted. It should be stated at the outset that the withholding of this information from Congress is itself illegal. I mean, Congress has passed many statutes that require reporting from the executive branch on just anything that's of any significance at all. Congress has a right to know that in its oversight role under the Constitution, in its role to tax and appropriate funds for government activities. You can't deny information about executive branch activities to Congress. So in the first place, if there are hidden so-called legacy, crash retrieval, reverse engineering programs, they are illegal programs, certainly in the eyes of Congress. And Congress is the Article I branch of government. The President of the United States, the lawyers for the President of the United States have consistently over the years asserted that the President has so-called plenary authority over national security information. If you look at plenary in the dictionary, it says complete, total, unconstrained, total power over this. So that's the executive branch perspective. Congress has its own perspective. As Dylan pointed out, this is a no man's land. This is two co-equal branches of government sort of asserting their rights and privileges, right? The courts have a really hard time with questions like this. They're referred to as political questions, and they don't like to get in the middle of that, right? And they can't decide for one side or the other because both sides under the Constitution have shared powers here, right? So I think Dylan has famously said, this is an example of it's not a problem in the Constitution. It's a feature of our Constitution. But the other practical aspect to think about here is imagine if the Department of Defense and the intelligence community have stated to Congress for 80 years, we are not withholding any information from you. UFOs don't exist. NHI does not exist. And then somebody tells Congress that it does exist, and then they prosecute that person for telling us that the executive branch has been lying to us for 80 years. I mean, I tell you, you know, there's a lot of things that would piss Congress off, but I think that would be the most amazing blow the top of their heads off. You know, if the executive branch had the gall to try to prosecute someone for telling Congress something that they've withheld from Congress. I just don't see it. Now, easy for me to say, I'm not a potential whistleblower, and those poor people have to think, yeah, but what if you're wrong, you know? Well, Congress can also immunize people. They can subpoena people and offer them immunity in exchange for their testimony. That is a powerful tool that can work here. The problem is that the executive branch has so many informal and alternative ways to retaliate. They can fire people. We've seen this with this administration. They can fire you, and they can find any reason that they want to fire you. They can take away your security clearances. That means taking away people's livelihood. But in terms of this prosecution risk, I personally think it is rare. It is very much exaggerated. Another thing that Congress can do is to appropriate restitution funds. You know, if someone who's providing important information to Congress gets stripped of their clearances, they lose their job, they lose their livelihood, you know, Congress could give them an award, $1 million for your handicaps that have resulted from your testimony to Congress. Whistleblowers can also come to Congress confidentially and privately to various committees. And that has been an important aspect so far of our investigation into the UFO phenomenon, is that we have had individuals come forward privately and without the knowledge of their superiors. And they have not been outed by Congress. It is a little difficult because then members of Congress can't tell their colleagues what this person said. So it stays in small circles, but nonetheless, it is a strong tool. I would also say, though, that Congress has not covered itself in glory in protecting the whistleblowers that have come forward. I'm a lifetime congressional employee. It pains me to say this, but it's really true. Congress should be out there fighting to protect these whistleblowers.
Thank you for that. Quick time check, Sheree. How are we doing on time?
Terrible.
Yeah.
We got it.
5 minutes?
Yeah. That's
okay.
5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, questions or something.
Okay. One thing I wanted to ask about, one of the purposes of our organization is building political capital for this topic on Capitol Hill, meeting with Congress. A few of the things that I'd like to talk about, drone incursions. I think drone incursions are something that has built some political capital for this. I'd also like to talk, hopefully, before we end, about this upcoming Age of Disclosure documentary and if there's potential for increase in political capital there. But let's start with drones. This is a real, people have seen these things over their homes in New Jersey, in Connecticut. They have shut down airports all across the U.S. eastern seaboard. They're now doing it in Europe. The entire Belgian airspace was shut down. How do you think about the drone topic and the drone incursions that we have, and potentially globally, and how they relate to UAP?
Yeah, I've been gone for 18 months, and quite a number, or a significant number of these drone swarms, incursions have taken place since then. So I'm a little handicapped in that I'm not there and able to press people in the executive branch on a classified basis about what they know and don't know. But from the outside, boy, this is so confusing and it's so weird. some of these things, you see the news reports and the imagery, they look like, yeah, these are commercial drones, or they're hobbyist drones. You look at others and you say, well, they're just misidentifying, helicopters or civil aviation or the like. But you also have seen some pretty strange looking things flying around. And if these things were just, run-of-the-mill stuff, you would think that the government could be doing a way, way better job of identifying them, figuring out where the hell they're coming from, who's operating them, where are they retrieved. And we have nothing. We have almost nothing. You've also heard, some senators and quoting senior military officers talking about this and saying, yeah, at Langley Air Force Base, where all the F-22s are, we had to shut down the base. And the government has no idea what the hell's going on there. Does it make me suspicious that a significant fraction of this activity is what we would call UAP? Yeah, I suspect it is. If we're not dealing with these things, now look, I understand that you can't just be shooting these things out of the sky. They're going to fall on somebody's house. They could kill people. So we have built up rules about and traditions about not shooting down things in the sky, especially when you don't know what it is, right? So we're starting to adjust to that. They're starting to give base commanders, in fact, in this year's NDAA, they're going to give base commanders for some bases the authority to sort of take kinetic action against these things. But we haven't had any success with electronic warfare means to go after these things either. So what are they? You would think that if we're so impotent against these things, is it because we're not talking about it because we're impotent and we can't do anything about it, which is scary? Or is some of this ours? So we're not talking about it because it's our stuff that's flying around? If the United States government knows that this is coming from adversaries like China and Russia, doing things from inside the United States or inside Great Britain next to our nuclear bases, why in the world wouldn't the government be acknowledging that? And it would create just a massive hullabaloo, right? So I don't have an explanation other than in the remarks I've made that I suspect there is a UAP component to this. But is it weird, and we got to do something about it. I mean, they can shut down. First of all, you saw what Ukraine did to Russia, right? They snuck in these short-range UAVs into Russia, and they were able to take out like $7 billion worth of strategic bombers in the distant interior of Russia. There's no reason why people can't do that here. They might have an easier time doing it here. So you bet your ass this is a serious issue.
Thank you for your thoughts there. I think it's fascinating to me that the majority of the public doesn't realize that things like the Langley incident, where some of our most sensitive airspace near Washington, D.C. required the moving an entire air wing away from there in order to try and resolve the security issues that they had. It's disturbing. Pivoting to this upcoming Age of Disclosure documentary, people have asked me, do you think this is going to be a hit? Do you independent of its commercial success, what impact do you think Age of Disclosure could have with the public and with the government on Capitol Hill, and the potential for creating political capital and awareness for the topic?
Well, it's certainly another brick in the wall, and maybe more than one. It's one of the smart things that Dan Farah, the director, did was he went to a whole bunch of former and current elected officials and appointed officials, and he said, look, you know, I'm not asking you alone to go and get on camera and say something affirmative about your belief in UFOs. I'm going to get like 35 of you to do it. So there's going to be safety in numbers. You know, you're not going to be alone on camera. And he seems to have been successful. I haven't yet seen the movie. There's going to be some kind of showing that I can attend in a few days. So I've only seen the trailer and interviews with some of the people involved, including Farah himself. But it certainly looks like it's going to be a very impactful film. There's a lot of very senior people in this movie giving their view about the likely truth about non-human intelligence visiting our planet. So it is going to be powerful. Is it going to have how big of an impression it's going to make on the American people and the government? Is an open question, though.
Thanks. Sharif, it's okay. Maybe one or two questions from the audience?
Yeah, I got this microphone, but you got to use it sort of like a walkie-talkie.
Okay.
So anyone have any questions?
Someone that hasn't spoken yet. Do we have any other hands? Yes, sir.
What's your take on having the SSIC release the testimony from the 40 to 50 whistleblowers with redactions to do an end run around all this legislation?
Yeah, well, you know, I would tell you something. When Dave Grush filed as a whistleblower, my immediate response as a staff member of the Senate Armed Services Committee was to make inquiries over to the Office of the Secretary of Defense, to the civilian side of the military, to ask, you know, what was the status of it, what was the timeline, you know, things like that. It was administrative questions only. I wasn't asking like, you know, have you investigated his stuff and what do you think? No questions like that, right? Well, my staff director found out that I had posed those questions over to the department, and she reamed me out about it. And I've already known, I knew before this, but she really reinforced it, that when a whistleblower complaint is filed, Congress is pretty paralyzed. Like the inspectors general, that's why we have them. They are supposed to investigate and assess these whistleblower accounts. And any queries, any probing from Congress is going to be received as potentially interfering. I mean, even if I was doing it in absolute good faith, you know, the impression can be left if there's reporting about a congressional staff people making queries about this kind of thing, is that there's political interference, and that causes huge problems of its own. So my staff director told me and my colleagues, don't you ask a single thing about them, right? Well, the only people in the Senate who got to hear Dave Grush was, at first, the general counsels on majority and minority staff for the Senate Intelligence Committee. They were the only people who got to debrief Dave Grush. Later, the transcript from those things were made available to more of the staff of the Senate Intelligence Committee. They have never been made available to the staff of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Just because the way whistleblower stuff works, it's handed off to the Senate Intelligence Committee. Something similar happened in the House. The only people who've heard Grush's testimony is the House Intelligence Committee, as far as I know. Now, you know, they could certainly do redactions. I think that the redactions would be really, really extensive. I don't think there would be much that would survive out of that, frankly. But sure, they could do that. Congress could call many witnesses. You talked about 40 witnesses or whatever. Yeah, Dave Grush can name lots of people, okay? And Congress could absolutely request that they come and testify, subpoena those people. Part of the difficulty is Dave Grush made commitments to a lot of these people that he was not going to provide their names, you know? And a lot of them don't want their names mentioned to Congress. Because these were people who voluntarily shared information with Dave. Not all of them. A lot of them are people that Dave would be happy if Congress subpoenaed them. But I'm just saying it's not as completely straightforward as it seems. There's all other considerations. But basically, to answer your question, there's a lot that Congress could do to get more of this information out. There it is.
One more, or are we done?
Earlier when we were speaking, I referenced Richard Bissell.
Yes.
Dr. Bissell, as you well know, was a Yale economist like myself and responsible for U2, SR 71, and the Corona program. When we talk about this issue of UAPs, it comes down to two things. One, economics, and externalities. And Mr. Guthrie, I want to thank you for your model. We built a model similar to yours back in 1994 at Georgia Tech, working with the J. Forrester Lab, using system dynamics. And when we used the Nash equilibrium, it was not accurate. When we ran it as a check against the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Fulda Gap, war always happened. And so the question was, what was the core that was missing? And that's when we added the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we saw that the model worked a little better. My point is that Congress will not move until there's an externality, whether it's Cape Girardeau, whether it's Kecksburg, whether it's the 1952 flap over Washington, D.C. So Congress is not the issue. The issue is in the statistical overlay, when will one of these things crash and we have undeniable proof that it exists? So I want to thank you for your model. You brought a rigor to this. But I did want you to know it's not Nash equilibrium. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because human beings make decisions about how they do things. And yes, to the issue of whistleblowers, I think Gary McKinnon and a whole bunch of people would say Congress will burn you at the stake. I don't see that changing anytime soon. You and I have probably the same backgrounds, experiences. One wrong word, you're in the street. But this issue is fundamental to the American diaspora now. And thanks to you and your group, I believe it's going to have the intended effect with groups like this, mobilizing. But yes, the issue is not if they're here or why they're here. And I'll leave you with this that Mr. Bissell said, the issue is economics in terms of the transformation of societies with the technology. That is the issue that they can't come to terms with, because if you, we work on maglevs at Georgia Tech. If you have that technology loose here, what about all the core industries? So I think it's a question more of economics, less fear of the alien threats, since we know what they are.
There's a lot to comment on in your question. You know, you talk about the economics. You know, the allure here, the attraction is, my God, the way these things fly around, and they potentially crossing, you know, galaxies or something, interstellar travel. They have, and Dylan, I think, put up a chart showing the calculations by Kevin Knuth and other physicists about the power that's just on display when these things are going barreling at many Machs and do right-hand turns. You know, the power involved here. So, you know, free energy or amazing amount of energy, right? Well, you know, that's wonderful, but it's also disruptive. I would also say that a thought that certainly occurred to a lot of us, Dylan used the example of nuclear weapons. Well, yeah, nuclear weapons, we could control that. You know, we could tell the world that nuclear weapons exist. They saw how powerful they were, but we didn't say anything about how to make them. And it turns out that was kind of hard to understand for a good while. Now it's much easier to understand. But the other thing is it required a huge industrial base, right? You had to mine the uranium. You had to create the plutonium. You had to enrich it, right? You had to have heavy water plants and things like that. All of this is a massive industrial scale capabilities and capacities, right? And there also comes with observables, right? So we can kind of see when other countries are going down this path, and it has allowed us to somewhat contain proliferation here. But what if this technology, as exotic as it is, what if it should turn out that it's like, once you understand the principles of the physics, what if it isn't that hard? And so, like, you really have a proliferation risk. So you can't just remake your economy and to use this energy. What if that energy can allow you to do like incredibly destructive things, right? So I could foresee that there's dilemmas in how to deal with the societal economic impacts of these technologies. But you mentioned Richard Bissell. I don't know if anyone happens to have seen this, but there was he just died recently, a diplomat, Harold Malmgren, and he was a figure in national security and economics and trade for a long time, decades, and he advised many presidents, multiple presidents. Towards the end of his life, he publicly asserted that Richard Bissell, in fact, had told him about a UFO crash above Johnston Atoll, the famous atoll in the Pacific where we conducted so many of these tests. Right. And that we had shot down a UFO that was monitoring a nuclear weapons test. And that UFO got too close to a special warhead that was designed to take down nuclear reentry vehicles in space. It was an enhanced X-ray device, and they've declassified the imagery. You see that this thing falling out of the fireball, going right down into the Pacific, right? So Richard Bissell is noteworthy for having alerted some people that he thought should know about this had happened. So there's multiple other instances of similar cases where UAPs are flying right next to a test reentry vehicle or an ICBM when we're testing.
Being a great patriot.
I'm sorry?
Thank you for being a great patriot. People needed to hear that.
Yeah, well, it's happened. I've kind of got lost in my own underwear here, so I don't know what where I was going to end up with this. But
can I do a hot take?
Yeah.
I know you only had 2 questions, but we have Radcliffe in the executive now. We have Rubio in the executive. He was probably involved when you were.
He was.
Why don't you think they've been more accommodating, at least engaging on this topic? Why isn't always this no man's land between Congress and the executive? Like, I was really hoping, I felt like we got, a full house when that, just in terms of cards, like when they took office. Like, we've seen zero motion from the executive. What's your take?
Well, you're absolutely right. There was a lot of hope, anticipation that Trump would end up being the disclosure president, and all the people that you mentioned and others. Tulsi Gabbard had said things. Mike Waltz, the first national security advisor, had been on record about this, and Rubio was absolutely. He was really involved. One of the senators who was really working with staff to look into this. And when you see what he's already said a lot in public, and when you see him in the Age of Disclosure film by Dan Farah, he reiterates all the things that he said publicly so far. So yeah, there was hope. I don't know what to tell you, because it's one thing when they people say these things when they're not in government, shit happens. People tell them, oh my God, you can't do that. We can't do this, and you have to sell the guy in charge before anybody's going to say anything. And maybe Trump, for whatever reason, is not ready for this. Maybe he doesn't want to admit that there's a force in the galaxy that's more potent than he is. I don't know. I have no answer.
Okay, thanks. Shri, should we take a... Go ahead.
Yeah, so since time seems to be an anomalous phenomenon in this room, let's have like a 20-minute break. I think some people want...
Do you mind if we roll through just because I've got to get on the road? So... is that okay?
Yeah, do you have your slides?
Well, I'm thinking let's just go without the slides. Yeah. So,
Do it. Yeah, let's...
It's my hometown.
Yeah, this is... okay, let's...
Yeah, woo! Yeah, this is absolutely not...
Coming on up. Coming on up.
Yeah.
Great to see you. Do you have everything you need here? No computer? No slides. Okay.
Let's go.
All right.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. Thank you for having me at Yale tonight. Thrilled to be back. I was here at Yale from, I guess, September 2004 till 2009 in May. But you know that funny thing where they make you walk a year later if you miss your dissertation. So how many people here are really deep into UAP? A few, awesome, great. And then is everybody else just kind of learning about it, interested? A lot of heads nodding, kind of, interested in it, which is awesome. And then, we always welcome, questioning. And do we have some folks here that are also skeptical? Okay, not a lot of skeptics in the room. One skeptic, so interesting. And, kind of a funny skeptic story. And we're live, right? Are we being filmed or something? So kind of a funny story that was totally fine, but yeah, Ryan was over here, and he was kind of he didn't realize he was being filmed, and he brought in, he was kind of talking about how he had briefings with the NSF. So, I kind of said, hey, NSF, by the way, isn't this awesome? Look at all this information. And NSF is actually very, very open. So, there was even a leader over there, who at one point had said, kind of cut Ryan off and said, we watch the news, we know there are skeptics, but you don't need to talk to us like we're skeptics. You can just tell us what it is. So I was very fortunate to see that the National Science Foundation, which really backs all types of innovation, all types of science, what we know, what we don't know, was really just very supportive of conversations on innovation and technology in any field. When I was program director at NSF, I had the opportunity to fund companies that went on to share that they were working on developing warp drives, directional force. So some would call that anti-gravity. Anti-gravity might seem like a nice to have, as we move on further into space, to planets where there is lower levels of gravity. Gravitational control will actually be very important for things like gestation, the ability to maintain human life and reproduction off planet. So you can look at it like, how do we adjust our health processes, for instance, to life in different levels of gravity? Or are there a range of technologies that you can use to modify or control gravity or a directional force? And certainly you see these platforms that, okay, they're rotating, so maybe that creates some effect. And there are certainly people who are working on very different ways of doing that. And that is one of the many technologies that these observables, of the lift that so many of us have seen. But kind of just getting back, because it's so nice to be here at Yale. I think that when there's something before that's huge, that's really big, before it's known, sometimes people just really, they're not aware or they're not into it. So one of my favorite examples of this, being, I'm from Boston, and as you know, I'm a Yaley here with you all. But I often say y'all because I've been living in Virginia a long time, and that's a great efficiency. But how many people thought the Kennedy speech for going to the moon was pretty good? That's seen as like some people feel like this was one of the most exciting speeches of all time. So one time, I actually went to watch, obviously online, the full speech. And what you see is, and it might have been a very hot day down at Rice in Texas, but you see people that, and these are the people that are sitting behind President Kennedy. These are the people that you select to say, make the president look really good. You're really behaved when you're sitting, maybe less, at a commencement speech. But basically, you've got people smoking cigars. It's very entertaining to watch. And when they show the speech, they splice it. But I'm going to give you the updated speech today. So it's something along the lines of, a few years ago, we hadn't heard from Grush about biologics. We hadn't heard from Lou about reverse engineering. We hadn't heard from Tim about, going through the water. And we don't do these things because they are easy. We do them because they are hard. No, it's not. It's why do we do this? Why do we go to the moon? Why do we go to Mars? Why do we pursue these advanced technologies? We choose to go, you don't say we choose, the way you see it is we choose to go to the moon, or we choose to disclose. What he really says is, why does Yale play Harvard? We choose to disclose. So that's what made the crowd go wild, was he said, why does Rice play Texas? That's when the crowd went wild. But they splice that out and they make it feel like everybody was just so excited about going to the moon. Watch it, they're smoking cigars, they're kind of like, it's hot, this is a commencement, get me out of here. Obviously that was a tremendous triumph 10 years later to actually put humans on the moon. So who's going to win? Who's going to win at the game? What are you guys going to do? Yale? Is it going to be Yale or is it going to be Harvard? Not a lot of football fans here. I need to hear a little bit. Tailgating. You all are going to be tailgating. So you're telling me it's going to be Yale. Well, so one of the things that Yale has been very active in over the years. So I want to come back and thank you as this club for really your leadership in that you are one of the clubs that is really nationally active. We just had the privilege of having Sri on in something that's the pre-opening of the Age of Disclosure in theaters. We brought about 18 experts together on disclosure, and Sri was one of them, really speaking to the Yale community and your activity, and you're really a beacon for other universities, and you're bringing people together, you're breaking news. Yale has been doing this for a while inside your networks. So when I was here at Yale and shortly after I graduated, this was the type of thing that, yes, people did speak about aliens. They did speak about UAPs. So you might have already been having those conversations in your dorm or with alumni. And so when people were telling me about those things back in the 2009, 2010 timeframe, some of that was a lot more high level. And so what you've done to take it from a time when, yes, there was a lot of knowledge, maybe at every university, maybe not, but certainly here at Yale, those conversations, those people sharing things, taking that from close relationships or communities and bringing that to the world, as you are, in your recordings that you're putting out online, in your outreach and in your bringing in experts. So I guess in terms of a path, because many of you, you're thinking, regardless of your stage of your career, you're probably thinking about what's the impact that you want to, you might be thinking about what are the impacts that you want to have. There might be other things that drive your curiosity here. I was at Yale as an engineer, and I also had one of my suggestions in terms of how are we going to engineer the most turnout on a Thursday night was going to be, let's have this at Griffin's, because I know people show up at Griffin's, which is the campus pub, on Thursday night. Probably not until a little bit later, but that used to be where everybody went. And that included a number of really strong entrepreneurs at that time. You know, great people like Rob McGinnis of Prometheus, Chad Rigetti of Rigetti Supercomputing, and while it wasn't the exact same time, Staff Sheehan of Air Company. So many great entrepreneurs from this university. One of the things that has been my path is really to support those entrepreneurs and those high growth companies. Some of them from Yale, the one that I mentioned was Air Company. So the way I got brought back into the whole UAP area, and also the Disclosure Foundation, was that people came to me, leaders at NASA, DOD, and we brought together a community of people to look at the most advanced energy and space technologies. And in that group, which was in an unclassified setting, we would have very interesting questions of, well, can you achieve this type of performance? And then people would say, should we have been having this conversation in an unclassified setting? And then we'd say, well, there's this publication from the Russians from this year, and you find this other one from the Chinese in this other year. So a lot of these things are actually open. So the impacts on advanced propulsion, advanced communications, advanced materials, much more efficient energy, AI, quantum communications, these are areas of competitive advantage in technology and bringing abundance to people, which is why my role in the NSF was leading the space portfolios, the energy portfolios, and really trying to help companies move from the earliest stages to high growth. So was able to recommend about $250 million in early stage grants that those companies are growing beyond 20 billion today. So there's so many things that we've seen in disclosure, and in that role and in co-chairing alongside NASA across the US government, all the space engaged entities. So I co-chaired the US Space Economy Interagency Working Group. And we were seeing all this great disclosure that was happening before Congress. We kind of thought, can't wait to be brought into these briefings. This is going to be great. Really looking forward to this. And those meetings weren't really happening across the interagency. And then we thought, oh wait, we're the ones that are supposed to do that. We're the ones in the leadership positions that can bring people together in terms of the innovators across the government and say, let's focus on the most important, and this, I'm just putting the space framing here because this was all the space entities across the government, which was transitioning from not just being space by NASA and Space Force, but also saying, because advanced pharmaceuticals, microgravity is so advantageous in terms of faster drug development, in terms of ability to create organs, that you would actually need NIH for that, and NSF. The Department of Energy being important. So many of these different entities, but when we would talk about what's important in space, launch, communications, semiconductors, biotechnology, moon infrastructure, we would also say UAP technology. We would say things like the remote viewing techniques that have been used in the Stargate program. And so we ended up spending about a third of these all-day interagency events that we did online that were open to the public on UAP. And what we found was amongst the innovators and the builders and the entrepreneurs, these were the areas of highest interest. So at one point, we, I kind of brought that we had a very close-knit group of a few people going into the very edge of advanced technology. And then we brought in a speaker who's actually in the age of disclosure. This is now probably about a couple years ago, Dr. Hal Puthoff. And he gave us an amazing presentation. Well, first when he came in, he said, we brought him in and we said, oh, thank you so much for joining. We're having you listen to what we say. He sits through the presentation, and then we say, by the way, we would love to have you come in and present. And he says, well, I'm trying to remember. He says, well, would you like my extended electrodynamics presentation, which is advanced energy? Would you like my remote viewing presentation, or would you like my UAP presentation? So I thought, well, really, I want all three of them. And I want them right now. We're ready to just, if this were on Netflix, we just keep watching this. But we did say, we want UAP first. So he came in, he gave us this amazing presentation, and like I said, there were times where Yaleys back in the day were telling each other things about, mentioning this about UAP, and then it was, it wasn't always something that you heard something, but then you didn't feel like you were authorized to necessarily talk about it. It was more, people were speaking less freely at that time. So we listened to that and we said, well, I wonder if it would be possible to share this more broadly. So we asked Hal, can we talk to more people about this? And he said, sure. He gave these presentations, and I would encourage you to watch, his presentations on the Joe Rogan show. People like Charles Chase, who is an ex-leader at Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. People like Jay Stratton worked with us, Ryan Graves, Gary Nolan. We were fortunate to have Dylan in. So many great people. We learned a lot of things about advanced energy, craft over the last couple of years, orbs, exotic materials, different unusual biologics from around the world. And what we found was, and that was all subsequent, but we found that when people got those initial presentations, so we're talking about online, interactive, hundreds of entrepreneurs in the interagency folks, afterwards I would go to them and say, well, now the speakers are gone. This is a day or two later, because these are companies that I've funded in my portfolio. What do you think about this? And the first person said, we are scientists. We must find out what's going on. And I thought, okay, this is much more normal than I would have expected. And the second person says, this is all up in pilots' faces all day and every day. And I thought, wow. This is a much more advanced conversation. So ultimately, we found that out of the innovators, about half of people had experience with anomalous phenomena. And I've seen a wide range of things. I've been told a wide range of things. But and it wasn't always that it was craft. Sometimes it was craft. Sometimes it was orbs. Sometimes it was beings, materials, time inconsistencies. Some people call it space-time metric engineering, consciousness effects. So a wide range, almost kind of precognition, telepathic. So there was a wide range of things that scientists were experiencing. And in our community, people have moved from waiting for people to tell them things to figuring out what they're going to build and what the impact is. So I know that this has been a long evening, so it's probably a good time for me to just roll into questions. Or did you want to ask me some questions?
No, I think we should have all the panelists basically come up.
Okay.
And we can
excellent. Good.
questions.
Yeah. So since we're in some sort of time warp, I think we're going to just move straight to questions and then kind of just be hanging out afterwards to just mingle. And so if Dylan and Kirk, do you guys want to all come up on stage? So I think what I'm going to do, like, we're going to have one microphone for the 4 of them. We got 4 seats. And then I got this like walkie-talkie lapel mic. So yeah, I think, yeah, let's...
I promise we'll stop when you cut us off.
No, yeah, let's give it like a little chunk of time. I'm gonna just get this camera angle. 1 second. That's beautiful for you. Fantastic 4. All right, so yeah, I guess one question I had to start off is like, so you guys have been working with whistleblowers. You guys have been like, you know, in touch with like the highest levels of government. Like, what's the spiciest thing that you can say, that like the most interesting thing for the public audience that you can say without getting your security clearance revoked or something?
It's all spicy. It's all exciting.
Looks like he has something to say.
Choosing from many options without getting without.
Just start rolling. It's not like they only need to hear one.
No, look, we're like.
Well, you know, people have told us that there are at least 4 different NHI species that are in contact with people on Earth, right? You know, you probably are familiar with this litany, but it's you know, the tall whites, the short grays, the reptilians, and the insectoids. You know, like they look like praying mantises or something. You know, so that's pretty shocking, right?
From credible people?
Or
is that just
listen,
crazy as they can?
No, well, it's both. It's you know, it's a wild thing, but I will tell you that I would say that what I think some others who were involved in this, it came from the most credible source of all. You know, we joke about that was witness 1. You know, so anyway, how's that? How's that for somebody else?
I try to be in this field as cautious with making factual claims.
I'm not claiming this was fact.
No, I agree, and I understand that as well. I would like to highlight, though, that one of the many odd things about this topic is this persistence of a variant of the 6th observable, which is biological effects on observers. And that can include these sorts of effects on perception, the time dilation or anomalies, and the consciousness of the observer. And you know, many witnesses allege that they, in having a UAP encounter, will feel feelings of love or dread, that they will see distortions in perception. And I always like to sound a note of caution that by the terms of those very statements, then you know that you are being shown things that you yourself haven't experienced before, and that your sense perceptions are functioning in a different way. And so beyond that, it's difficult to sort of penetrate the veil of that sensory anomaly to assert any real truth about what it is that you're seeing, right? Or is it 4 species? Is it 10? Is it 1 seeming as many? You know, the cover of one of Jacques Vallée's books called Messengers of Deception is an illustration of an alien holding different masks that represent different cultural phenomena. And so that framework in Vallée, I think, would do us well in trying to assess these claims that perhaps our senses, you know, as the oldest of the philosophers would say, our senses deceive us in some way. And so it does become difficult in making heads or tails of many of its claims.
So I can very much... So one thing that I would say from working in the interagency is it was very notable to me that multiple types of exceptional leadership are important in any field. So the approach that, say, the Small Business Administration versus the SEC, like a regulatory authority, versus the Department of War, versus the National Science Foundations. There are different mandates. So in some mandates, the importance of caution is very important, or security and defense versus exploration and building. So I come from the exploration and building side of the house, and now as an investor would also say that when we think about what we build or what we don't build, deciding not to have something in a portfolio or deciding not to be prepared for certain scenarios, that's also something that has outcomes. So inaction is actually also an action. And so I think that in this field, in many cases, obviously we're coming from decades ago, quite a bit of stigma. People were reputationally torn apart. That continues today. So there are many reasons for caution, and sometimes there's the, kind of extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, or whatever, that quote is. It's actually pretty extraordinary, the idea that there wouldn't be life elsewhere in the universe. It's a wild idea. As a mom, it's kind of, you say, you put a sandwich somewhere, what does it look like a week later? You get issues in clean rooms that they're not really clean. So I've actually, I would encourage that rather having a bar of certainty or high levels of discretion, usually in science or in entrepreneurship, we're trying to iterate as rapidly as possible. We have no fear of failure. We're trying to move forward. So I would say that it's very hard to see something alone, to your point on sensing. So when you see something really unusual alone, it can be hard. I've been in that situation on rare occasions, and then I've known people who have seen that, or in some cases I've seen the very same thing with multiple other people. But I've had primary experience with a wide range of the phenomena. In many cases, that's been with 10 other people, 2 other people, many of them top people in government, entrepreneurs, people out at festivals type thing, hundreds of these at a time, much like the people in New Jersey and the tri-state. They were seeing a wide range of things. So I've had primary viewing of exotic materials, biologics, craft, orbs, and some of those things I would say I would like to see a lot more information of. So it's not, some of it is non-conclusive, and other things like your point about sensing, they now are on video. So many of these things are actually on video. So I would just say that both have heard many things from people, but have also seen firsthand quite an array of the phenomena and the technology.
And I want to make sure that my remarks aren't saying that I don't believe that there's nothing there. It's that our interpretations of those events or these phenomena are what require to be tested. And so I think Anna and I are certainly in agreement there. And I also wanted to, at the risk of driving Shri up the wall by some unstructured remarks, I had heard the phrase extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. It's the ECRE standard, sometimes called the Sagan standard. And there's been a lot written about that standard. And when you start to think about it as sort of a rule of decision about scientific claims and evidence, I would bring your attention to the word extraordinary, right, which is a qualitative, almost inherently subjective word that is used in this standard. And it appears both to modify the claim, an extraordinary claim. Well, what is that? It's one that's unusual, outside of the ordinary by definition. And then you have that claim somehow requires in some indistinct way a corresponding extraordinary amount or weight of evidence. And I would submit to you that claims just require evidence. There's a quote by a philosopher I like, Bertrand Russell, and we can all sort of quote philosophers at our convenience, but he had stated once that in one of his books that the truth about physical objects must be strange. The truth might be unobtainable, but the fact that it is strange ought not to be made as an argument against one's opinion. And I suggest that we give some weight to that kind of opinion as to what sorts of evidentiary standards we should be using, because extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary evidence just sort of begs us to surface whatever prejudices we might have, and it's simply not productive.
Could I add to that? So I guess I would also say it depends on your objectives, right? So, and what's going to move certain fields forward. So elections are 51%. Creating new technologies can take one team. It can take a small set of investors. So I think that just the ability to try things, and then some normal terrestrial fields are full of misinformation. So I know some financial markets, we do our best in terms of regulating out, but there's a lot of competitive misinformation. So as business people, something that you would maybe even tell your competitors is, oh no, you gotta wait for extraordinary evidence. Meanwhile, people just go build, build, build. There's nothing to see here, folks. Build, build, build. So you can decide to sit on the side. You don't need certainty to try to build things that may or may not work, but the people that try to move faster are going to get there faster. So anybody on the sidelines is not going to win and get there first in terms of building these capabilities. So we are not looking for certainty in any case when we are funding an early stage entrepreneur in any area of technology. All new technologies have many risks of working or not, and it's no different in UAP.
Yeah, we also have more questions. So are you guys kind of good on that? So yeah, we have another question.
Hi, I have a question, two questions actually for Kirk. So first of all, thank you for all of your comments, which I appreciated. You said that one of the reasons that the UAP Disclosure Act hasn't been passed by Congress is that the majority of Congresspeople aren't convinced there's a there. Of the Congresspeople who have heard the closed door testimony, how many of those, what fraction of those do you think are convinced there's something to the UAP phenomenon?
Well, the answer though is skewed. I would say that the people the senators who have attended these meetings, are pretty convinced. Some more than others, but I mean they were I'd put them in the believers camp, right? But that was self-selecting. I mean, they sort of found the topic as much as we were able to get them to come, right? So it's I would be really hesitant to suggest that, oh, we had an 80% success rate or something with senators, so gee, if we could only get them in a room. I don't know if that's true, if that pattern would hold up. But the senators who came, and listened carefully, have been, impressed by what they've heard.
And they need 51% of the vote to keep their job. So most people don't need 51% of their state to agree with them to get things done. So that's a lot of leadership for those that step in.
Yeah. So, thank you. Another question I had was, you said that you wished Congress had approached things differently, looking back in retrospect. What did you mean by that? And are there any lessons for Congress going forward?
Yeah, my prime example is AARO, that office that we created in the Pentagon. The current director is better and is, doing a semi-serious job there, John Kozlowski. But the first director, Sean Kirkpatrick, was, I think, a disaster. I mean, I don't think he helped the cause at all. And that office has proven to be, you know, I wouldn't say ineffective, but you know, even I mean, some people look at it and say it's a source of disinformation. I mean, it's now become part of the process of keeping disclosure from happening. So, you know, what I had in hindsight, I guess I was thinking, gee, you know, did it make any sense to create that thing? You know, our thought was that we were going to set up an office like that, and we did. And we said that anybody who has a story to tell, regardless of whatever non-disclosure agreement they signed in the past, they had a get-out-of-jail-free card. They could go into that office, Arrow, and tell their story and suffer no repercussions for it, right? It would be a controlled, secure space, you know, no limits on what they could say. And we enacted that. And what happened is that people would go in there, and there would be some guys there sort of taking notes. They didn't tape it. They didn't transcribe everything that they said. They claimed that they were going to write up a report and send it back to the witness to review it and approve it and all, like, and none, well, little of that happened. They just wouldn't do the job that we tried to set them up to do. And, you know, this happens with legislation. Legislation is not a magic wand. It doesn't make people conform to the letter, much less the spirit of what we write. So that's an example of what I mean. If we'd had more foresight, we would have done things differently. Thank
you. Good evening. I am the solitary skeptic, but I am here, and the next semester we'll teach here a class on the cultural history of extraterrestrial life.
I'm sorry.
So
the what? The culture?
Cultural history of extraterrestrial life. I will be teaching this class here at Yale. I teach in the History of Science program.
Oh, you said you're teaching it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
As a class in cultural history, really, as a topic in cultural history. And my question is for the whole panel. Would be open to the possibility that when investigations are done and when disclosures are done, all of those sightings and witnesses and so on will not be reconducible to extraterrestrial spaceship. All of these phenomena will not have to do with extraterrestrial spaceships. The reason I am asking this is I could bring you all of the witnessing and evidence that you want on the existence of dragons. I am a specialist of early modern science, not today's science. And there are the best naturalists of the time that believe dragons absolutely are real because there are so many sightings and so many people have seen them. The most famous naturalist of the 1600s anatomized a basilisk, that is, a small dragon. He described his anatomy. And I could tell you stories of abductions, dragons abducting people and taking them in their cave, and these people live with the dragons for months and so on. Very credible people like ship captains encountering mermaids or mermen, trying to pull them on the ship. And in the end they escaped. They go to port. They tell the admiral, that was in 1730. The admiral gets mad. Why didn't you just shoot the animal and pull it on board? I want it for my museum of natural history. And naturalists that are not at all credulous, not at all very skeptical, saying, oh, in my museum I have these feet and this hand or this body part of mermaids and so on. And so I do think that extraordinary statements need extraordinary evidence. By extraordinary statement, I would say, let's use Occam's razor. You do not use unneeded explanations, when natural explanations or the one that you have already at hand could be sufficient. So
there's multiple hypotheses possible, right? So, and I'm not going to remember all of them, but certainly, all right. So number one hypothesis is the United States has advanced technologies. We, in all fields of technology, have ultra advanced technology. It's amazing what we have. And some of that is more from the class, it could be the classified or the Department of War or, you know, all these other agencies. Some of it, it's just, there's amazing things happening in labs around the country that are not getting out of the lab due to lack of capital. So if you're wondering, does the United States have advanced technology? We do. It's been announced already that we have these ultra advanced crafts. So yes, we have a number of craft. We've had people give that testimony to Congress, and the Disclosure Foundation has been active in that. So United States, yes. Adversarial countries, okay? That's hypothesis number two. You know, many people would say, yes, other countries have this as well, okay? Then there's extraterrestrial. So, all right, I also fund moon infrastructure and space technology. By the way, we are going to be building technologies on the moon, on Mars. That's like the whole plan, is you build it there in situ. So this idea of technologies being built not on this planet, that's just kind of like in the plan. That's what's happening. That's the right now type thing, right? And is it other species? That's kind of a biological diversity thing. We're going to be putting life off planet. We've already put life off planet. So we've had humans in Leo for the last 20 years. We've put people on the moon. You know, the plan to bring people to Mars, wherever. We put humans off planet. So life off planet, yes. There are also hypotheses that, okay, there can be beings underwater. There can be beings underground. There can be interdimensional. So there's a wide range of hypotheses. So yes, you know, it can be a wide range of things. But there are also, anyways, I don't want to go too deep into, there's so many layers deep we can go. But yes, there's lots of ways things can be going.
I would just give a very short response, which is probably not the response that you're looking for. But it would be to acknowledge that those potentialities are at play here as well. I mean, in other contexts involving whistleblowers having nothing to do with UAP, but who nonetheless blow the whistle on classified programs, it's the stovepiping of those programs that in part keeps them secret. But that also means that when you have whistleblowers blowing the whistle, they are at the same time looking down those very same stovepipes and might not see how a particular program relates to another one and how those other programs might actually affect the alleged facts underlying their claim. So that's something that we would certainly need always to be open to, these different prospects. So that's the first thing I would say there is, like, yes, there are many hypotheses, as Anna was saying, but regardless of what the answer is, I think the response to your very excellent questions is a procedural one, which is that yes, and we should find out. And that's what we're trying to do. I mean, it's the very name of our foundation. It's the Disclosure Foundation. We want to know what the answer is, and we should be open to those answers. You know, I don't want to quibble on, you know, your rendering of what Occam's razor says or doesn't say. I mean, there's been much ink spilt on that, and the statement of Occam, as I remember it, was that, you know, causal entities should not be adduced without necessity. Well, you know, what is necessity? What is a causal entity? You know, how do you frame an entity? How do you frame the theory of causation? These are somewhat subjective inquiries as well, and you know, what I am a bit cautious about is that Occam's razor, which sets forth essentially an epistemological framework for what explanations ought to be considered and which ones shouldn't be, seems more to affect the prudent administration of the sciences as a human endeavor, to sort of keep science moving along in this sort of puzzle-solving scientific endeavor where paradigms aren't relaxed. And you and I were talking about, you know, Kuhn's scientific, or the structure of scientific revolutions, and that very much is at play there. And I think Occam's razor, viewed from that perspective, is just as much about keeping science along this normal puzzle-solving enterprise to which scientists in that pursuit are very much wedded. But it's possible that we're not looking at a normal scientific problem, but paradigmatic science, which relaxes some of those strictures and looks to other sources of knowledge and inspiration. And the last thing I'll say, and I know Kirk wants to help answer this question, as well, is it's difficult to reduce to a scientific experiment an observation of an alleged or hypothesized intelligence which is aware of the observation. That sort of violates a good science experiment if the observer is in turn being observed, let alone by an intelligence that might be more intelligent than the observer and might have better technology than the technology of the observer. And from that perspective, this becomes an intelligence operation, just as much as it does a scientific inquiry. Thank you.
I would like to approach your question this way. If all we were relying on were human observations, I would certainly take your point, in a deeper way. But so much of what the evidence that I believe exists, and we've seen it, are instruments, sensors, right? Radars, infrared cameras, other kinds of cameras, magnetic anomalies, sonar. There's well-established reports about underwater objects traveling at just tremendous speeds. In the incident, the famous Nimitz Tic Tac incident of November 2004, what you had in one incident, what was happening there was the operators of the Navy's Aegis radar system, which is the most sophisticated radar in the Navy. It looks from the sea surface all the way up to near space, about 70,000 feet in altitude. And what those operators started seeing over a period of a couple of weeks, when the Nimitz battle group was working up for a deployment to the Middle East, is they saw objects descending vertically, just dropping at incredible speed from above the height of that radar, above 70,000 feet, straight down at a tremendous speed, and then at 20,000 feet, 15,000 feet, stopping on a dime, just stopping, and then starting to meander around. And then after hours, it would then go straight back up again, okay? The technicians, the radar operators, called in the technicians and said, this can't be happening. I mean, there's something wrong with the radar. They would spend hours trying to calibrate the radar and see if there's anything wrong with it. Each time they said, no, the radar's operating fine. So one day, another one of these things did that. Came straight down from space essentially, stopped on a dime at 20,000 feet and started moving around. They called then, they got on the radio and they called two airplanes, two F-18s that were both two-seaters, a pilot and a weapons officer in the back, who were on a training mission. And the guy that was running that training mission was the senior aviator on the carrier. He was in charge of the squadron. A very experienced guy. They all have perfect vision. They're all very trained people. So the Aegis ship called these guys up and said, real world mission, break off your training mission. We're going to vector you over for a real world event. So they're flying over there. They don't know what they're going to find. They don't know if it's a drug runner or if it's a ship that's capsized or a plane that's crashed or whatever. But they're moving towards this rendezvous. At a certain point, the radar operator is seeing this object on the radar, and it's seeing the planes coming in. He says, stop, look around. You're at what the Navy calls merge plot, where the radar is seeing all those objects in the same radar cell. It says, look around, you got to see this. This thing. They look around, and down above the ocean, several hundred feet above the water, and it was a clear, perfectly clear Pacific day, the ocean is roiling underneath this little tic-tac object, looks like a piece of candy. It's bouncing around erratically like that. All right, so while they were being vectored over to intercept that, the Navy's version of AWACS, it's called the E2C at the time, the Hawkeye, was also a radar at an entirely different frequency, was up flying around, and it saw this same object, not continuously, but intermittently. So you have two different radars at two different frequencies seeing the same thing. You now have 6 sets of eyeballs watching the same thing. So Fravor starts, he says, I'm going to go down and see what that thing is. He starts doing a spiral. He gets down to like 10,000 feet, and that thing starts moving and mirroring his flying motion in the opposite direction. He then cuts across this circle, going straight at this thing, and that's when it just went and disappeared over the horizon. So 6 sets of eyeballs saw this happen. I mean, there's nothing that humans know how to build that could do this, okay? So they call back to the carrier, and they said, this thing has just like vanished instantly over the horizon. What do we do? And they said, go to your rendezvous point. Well, that's supposed to be a secret thing that only the aviators, the pilots, know, and the people on the carrier. So they start heading off to their rendezvous point. Seconds later, they get another call from the Aegis ship. And the radar operator says, never mind, that thing just showed up at your rendezvous point. So they were watching it on the radar as it went over to this rendezvous point. So those guys flew back to the carrier. The carrier launched 2 more F-18s. They approached this object. Again, it's being watched the whole time by that radar. They get close to it. Their radar picks it up and locks on the target. This is yet another radar at a different frequency. And once they locked it up on radar, they slewed and locked up on infrared camera. So this is yet another part of the electromagnetic spectrum. They pick it up with their infrared. This has been publicly released. There's this thing that looks like a pill, you know, jiggling around at 20,000 feet, and all of a sudden it just goes and vanishes out to the side.
We also know so many other people who have seen this.
Well, with radars, with
data, and you know, there are people that have held these in their hand, you know, things in their hands and prodded them, and there's a wide body of a lot of these. There's work within the government in some cases. There's things that have been disclosed, and then there's multiple people that, in my case, I wasn't hanging out in UAP circles. These would be people that I knew for 15, 20 years. That there's no reason for them to bring it up, and then we've seen quite a breadth of it. So what we're finding is more and more people have also had, whether it's access to programs or see things out, you know, in their day-to-day life. So those folks are working to figure things out and build things both inside and outside of programs.
Did you want to respond?
No, please.
Oh, okay.
Which not everybody needs to do. I mean, fields of technology, typically it's a very small group of people. I mean, think about all the important things we need done in life. It's not that everybody needs to become, you know, a reverse engineering expert, but you know, the point about when are you going to have access to these technologies that transform your life or solutions, you know, I hope we get there sooner.
I've always been fascinated by the shifting standards of evidence with respect to this topic specifically. There seem to be, for any other subject that doesn't involve the sort of dialing down of our ego and having to acknowledge that there might be something bigger, better, smarter, what have you out there, for those things that don't present a threat to that, we seem to find a standard of evidence by which we can make determinations about what things are or are not. And yet, when we have that same constellation of evidence for something that indicates that this may be far stranger than we to determine what it is, or even maybe capable of determining what it is, then those prior standards of evidence, we abandon those to preserve our ego. I find it directionally important. You mentioned sort of Thomas Kuhn and the structure of scientific revolutions, that every single paradigm shift, the directionality, the vector of paradigm shifts is a dialing down of the human ego at every single step. It is the Copernican revolution. We are not the center of the universe. We are not the center of the solar system. At every point, that becomes dialed down. And so if that's the vector, it's just another reason why I think it's important to hold in mind that that vector of scientific revolution, and it's possible in paradigm shift, and it's possible that the next one could be acknowledging that there is something more intelligent than we are. There is, well, yeah, I think I would just stop there. And
of course. I really want to support these great points you're making, and just bring in the experimental data on this, because I've funded over 350 companies and I've worked with thousands of entrepreneurs, and I just want to say that the really exciting innovations terrestrially receive so much headwinds early on. So if I have something that's a disruptive technology, and I've done this with thousands and thousands of companies, I bring it to esteemed technical and commercial experts, and if I can get one person out of 4 to be interested in it, that's really high. That's good. That's high. So, when you talk about dialing back the ego, every single startup entrepreneur, the ego gets crushed in startups, and you got to pound through it. So, I've backed probably 20 companies that have gone from, almost nothing or nothing to over 100 million, multi-hundreds of millions, 6 unicorn companies from the beginning. Reusable rockets, alternative energies, advanced pharmaceuticals, advanced materials, AI. Nobody ever, so the stuff that people agree on isn't actually that good usually. It's more, this is the status quo. We can all agree that we can go get it at the gas station. It's fine. And the things that are really game changers, nobody's bought in. That's not a UAP thing. That's just if it's much better or much different, it's a small percentage of people that typically go after it and get it done or not. And it's fine when it's an or not. Most of the time, advanced technology doesn't always work out, which is okay.
I meant to say this at the outset. Dylan sort of mentioned this. This is not the Alien Foundation or the Alien Disclosure Foundation or the Classified Skunkworks Disclosure Foundation. This is the Disclosure Foundation. No one on this stage or in our organization claims to know what the truth is here. No one in this organization has a stake in whether this is a non-human intelligence or other. I think regardless of whether this is our stuff, foreign adversaries' stuff, non-human intelligence, it's all a psyop, or something that I'm not creative enough to imagine, other, the answer is sensational and worthy of attention. And I think that's what motivates our investigation, and the willingness to be open to the fact that NHI should be on the table. That should be a hypothesis. I've always been, when I have these conversations, people are very easy, it's a comfortable psychological position for them to be in, to say, yes, the universe is broad, there must be life elsewhere in the universe. But as soon as you say, there's like multi-sensor system data that may indicate that like those things are here, that immediately collapses and becomes a threat and something that's difficult to psychologically hold. So anyway, I just wanted to make the point about our organization, what stakes we have, what motivates us, and certainly not to say that we know that any one particular thing is true. This is why we think we need transparency and the Disclosure Foundation. So I hope that clarifies things a little bit.
And we're not a sightings organization.
We are not in the sightings business.
But the reason that I get very active in that is because when you're a scientist and when you're building, you need every data point, and you share information with collaborators to figure out what works and what doesn't. So it's never an issue if something isn't right, but if you're not iterating on all the opportunities in the data, we're not moving forward fast enough. So from the scientific standpoint, we say, give us the data, whether it's right, whether it's wrong. We want to see what's going on and what can build.
I just wanted to clarify. I'm not questioning your sources and your witnesses.
And sorry, the we was our investment firm. It's not the disclosure.
I just want to clarify.
If they're not in the study business, why did Anna talk about? Because yes, I do want you to tell me what you're building, which is separate from my role as an advisory board member.
Yeah, we just wanted to clarify. I'm not questioning your sources and your witnesses, and the fact that those radar tracks and what you are seeing do not seem compatible with anything that can be built by human beings. I cannot explain my sources either. Professor Carlos Eire, who wrote a book on levitating saints flying through the air built on an enormous amount of witnessing, he cannot explain his sources either. I'm skeptical in the sense, not that I do not believe that there is extraterrestrial life. I've been an amateur astronomer all my life, and my telescope is already cooling down in my backyard for when I go back. I would love to get evidence of extraterrestrial life and get in touch with aliens since I was 8 years old. I'm only saying that I'm skeptical in the sense it doesn't seem to me that what we have now is incontrovertible evidence that what we are seeing is alien technology. That's what I'm seeing. Not in the sense that it could not be, okay? But in the sense that I am totally supportive of your effort that the evidence is not there yet, at least according to my criteria for evidence.
So there are different types of data that you could accept or refute, right? But there are types of data that have to do with the isotopes, it has to do that you wouldn't expect to have on Earth, with certain materials and samples. There are certain things that you think, well, the processing, it doesn't look like it's terrestrial in nature. And then there are biologics that there's not a lot of overlap with terrestrial DNA from what some people share. Some of those claims, like as a scientist, I can understand why it's a totally normal approach to want to kick the tires on anything that you're going to invest your time in. So, it makes total sense that, as we have more access to data, we're going to get better information on that. So.
I'd like to elaborate in response to your point just now that aside from the hard evidence, what I would call hard evidence of non-human sensors, radars, infrared systems, optical systems. I would also say that what we have from sources is information about what the United States government is doing and has been doing, right? So this isn't about seeing something and thinking it's somebody's eyes and thinking it's this or that. This is reporting about what the government is actually doing, and that, yes, they have recovered crashed vehicles. They have taken custody of this. There have been bodies inside. They're trying to reverse engineer how these systems work. They don't have propulsion systems that we can recognize. They don't have lifting surfaces that we can appreciate. We don't know how they work, right? So this is also a factor, an important factor. And then on top of just these insiders telling us what the government is doing and has done, you also have all this reporting about the government programs from the outside. So, this is a whole nother body of evidence that meshes with the hard data from sensors, from technical sensors, right? So I think that this spans the modern era, right? So I think that this is so much more than just a human being seeing something anomalous. And as you say, in one age they see an angel or a demon or a mermaid or something like that. At the same time, in retrospect, we have people saying, you know what, when they thought they were seeing a chariot in the sky, maybe they were seeing a saucer. Like maybe these things have been coming here for 1,000 years and not 80 years, right? So that some of that could be misinterpretations of exactly this NHI phenomenon.
And just the other thing that I would say is, because if I was watching this from outside the government, I would have many of these same questions, because as somebody who was in the government for about 9 years, who worked in the interagency, I was seeing this across agencies. When these whistleblowers would come out, I was on the inside with people saying they're serious and they are real. We saw people, there's a lot of people who have worked in this. There was a lot of receptivity because people had experience. So I think also just that visibility that there is actually a lot going on, and the reputational access that we know who these people are because we work with them directly, and we, in some cases, understand their organizations and their motivations, and others less, because it's more arm's length. But this is something that is well understood by a number of people who've had the opportunity to vet, because for where we've been, I guess.
Did you want to?
This has been a really great. I'm just letting y'all cook. I don't want to interrupt. So, hi Anna, hi Jordan, and Kirk and Dylan. Nice to meet you. I know a couple of these guys. So, kind of like actually just a segue from Kirk's recent comment. So I'm an aerospace engineer. I work for a company that designs, builds, tests, and sells jet engines. So I guess if you were to tell someone in 1600 that you could dig up liquefied ancient life remains from the ground, put it into a machine that turns it into thrust to propel a metal tube through the air at hundreds of miles an hour to get people from place to place, they'd look at you like you're crazy. I think what we're seeing with the UAP technology that people have observed is it's just a science that hasn't been fully grasped or understood. So we can't conceptualize what that would look like, so it's very difficult to make that logical leap. And I think it was Jim Samivan that said, he's a senior executive from CIA, now retired, that this topic is indigestible because it's just so broad, it touches every discipline of science, technology, culture, politics, and it would be very, very disruptive. And UAPDA was an effort to kind of have a structured disclosure process to make it less disruptive. Is there any way, if that sort of legislation doesn't pass, that we find ourselves with this threat of catastrophic disclosure, and is the cost benefit to, is this legislation kind of something that needs to pass in order for our society to continue to function?
Catastrophic disclosure feels like a political term to me. I try not to use it, but I think the question of we should be asking this as an intellectual question in the government, in industry, in academia. Is this digestible? Is it indigestible? We should be looking at this topic through multiple disciplinary lenses to try and say, if this were true, like if we stipulate that this is true, what impacts would this have, and how could we adjust to it in the markets, with religion, with philosophy? I think that is a goal of our organization. There's rumored to be, I can't remember if it was SAIC or another organization that supposedly had classified studies about the impact of disinformation on our culture. I personally would like this organization to conduct the exact same exercise in the light, subjected to scrutiny, and try to develop. I feel like we should have. I don't want to give up on it being indigestible. I would like to try and leverage our intelligence and our problem-solving capabilities and dial down the ego and say, maybe this is true. And if so, how can we incorporate it? So.
I think it's a fascinating question, and one of the assumptions in your question is this notion of scientific progress over time, right? So that something, you're likening this technology to a jet engine being unveiled to someone in the 1600s. I've also heard the analogy of cows studying an iPhone, right, to sort of give a sense of the incommensurability of what it is that we're looking at. And all of those analogies sort of assume that scientific progress moves over time in a particular way, and that across these distances of time, or the evolution of a cow versus that of an iPhone, there is this sort of unbridgeable gap there. And I'm not sure whether science works that way. I'm not sure whether it does or not. I'm just sort of pushing back on that notion of scientific progress in that manner. It could be that science doesn't follow some sort of predestined curve or a function of. Yeah, right.
It's not moving like that at all, and you're seeing that with AI and these breakthroughs. It's totally not. Yeah. But people expect it.
Yeah. And then the second part of your question, I would urge you and everyone who is interested to read a book by a Hungarian economist named Karl Polanyi. And the book is called The Great Transformation, The Industrial Revolution and the Economic Origins of Our Time. This was a book drafted either during or shortly after World War II. It's a study of how liberalism, classically understood, sought to not stop or foster particular technologies and progress throughout Great Britain, but to manipulate the rate of change through a variety of social laws and structures. And so, yes, this could be greatly disruptive, but like Jordan, I do believe that we have a wealth of scholarship and sources throughout a millennia or more of our own existence that can, if not answer the questions outright, at least greatly assist us. And that might be a book to look to perhaps not the answer, but a way to arrive at an answer. Thank you.
Yeah, your question was very pointed, I think, about, do we need the UAP Disclosure Act to prevent a catastrophe, catastrophic disclosure. If it just sort of, if a saucer lands on the White House lawn, or something like that, and a bunch of creatures come out and everybody flips out, I would say that that is a legitimate concern. We hear it a lot. But then, first of all, I'm led to ask the question to myself, well, then who would be to blame? We've been trying to get the government, people have been trying to get the government, the executive branch of the government, to sort of come clean on this for a long, long time. And they haven't done it. So if it turns out that was a very irresponsible act, and that something happened that sort of forced this sort of climax that had bad repercussions, it's on them, I would say first. But there is a possibility that's what's going to happen. Jake Barber and the Skywatcher folks, if they succeed in getting one of these things to sort of land, and they're going to grab one of these eggs, that they showed a video of, I don't know, that's like game's up, right? But also, if it is NHI that's visiting here, they have a vote too. They get to decide how much and in what way they're going to risk exposing themselves. So shit, they could decide. I mean, you know, they might have thought, shit, we buzzed the Capitol in 1952 with a bunch of flying saucers and like nothing, right? Like.
Can I add to that? This feels like a good precedent.
Well, sure.
So actually, a number of us were invited to a reception at the Capitol Hill Club right before the recent hearing in September, and about 10 of us went outside. And people who, you know, you mentioned Jake Barber, who is using a psionic technique. We were out with some people that were using more of a prayer-based approach. So again, kind of a frequency that's being emitted. And there were orbs showing up in the Capitol right this year. And guess what? Nobody was even paying attention. President Trump was on Rogan. He says, yeah, you know, something, I don't know the quote, but it's, yeah, the people up there, I know a lot about that. You know, there's been so much disclosure that has happened. People are not freaking out. So I'm not worried about catastrophic disclosure. I'm a little bit concerned about some of these technologies being misused in the wrong hands or us falling behind. I think that's far more likely is, does some other country move faster, you know, whether it's China, you know, or some other country, and then are they using that for global good or not? I think that's a higher likelihood thing to look at than, you know, are we freaking out because things that have already happened happen again?
That's a great question. I think that's a great statement because it's important, independent of where these things come from, who controls them, what have you. If there is real data that, or real, have reason to believe that these things have landed, that we have recovered them, and so have our adversaries, and there is some technology behind them, you know, we could debate on where that comes from. Is that for extraterrestrial? Is it from here somehow? Something that's outside of our Umwelt, like our perception capability. In a sense, from that perspective, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we have them, our adversaries may have them, and if they figure it out first, we complicated apes are in deep trouble on this side of the pond.
Or if we don't bring energy abundance or cures, you know, or some of these solutions that, I mean, you brought up the idea of miracles, some of which correlate to some of the advanced physics and phenomena. And what if some of these demonstrations are not meant to be isolated incidents? It's more, why don't you make this advanced capability repeatable? I think about, can you imagine if, you know, before the harnessing of electricity, you're experiencing static electricity. And some people are saying there's static electricity, and others are saying, no, it's not a thing, it hasn't been harnessed. You're just really, it's not just the threat side, it's the opportunity side of not benefiting from these advanced capabilities that have been sensed. So that's right. The way we came at this was not, is it extraterrestrial? That wasn't actually the focus of what we were focusing on at NSF. It was, there are things that are higher performing, you know, and that have been documented, that have been proven, you know, on these sensing, or people brought them in. But then, even in the case that something is an idea, I mean, a lot of things are invented based on an idea that even hasn't been built. So it's kind of, how do you race towards those capability, abundance, and solutions?
Hello. Could you hear me? Hey.
Okay.
Oh, fantastic conversations. Actually, I have two very practical questions. I graduated from Yale microbiology department, so I studied some weird bacteria. So I know if I throw them outside of this Earth, this planet, they can thrive well. So I don't doubt something outside. So my question would be like, we talk a lot about physics, engineering, technology could be impacted by the UAP, but I guess the biochemistry and biophysics of those so-called aliens, they could be very different than our human beings. So in your opinions, what could be the opportunity or next frontiers regarding the biotechnology?
I think that's a question for you. I'm not sure.
Well, so anytime there is biological diversity, I mean, there's usually something to learn. So think about, there's a wide range of technologies that are based on biomimicry. There's a wide range of substances that, you say get out of the rainforest or a wide range of places. And then just understanding, also the impacts, I would say of, different technologies and phenomena. So I think that's really a rich area for, and to the extent that some of these things, for instance, have more advanced implants, let's say. We humans, we use implants, that's important. So you can imagine that if there are species that exhibit, more exotic implants, that might be something that we say, wow, we either really want that or we really don't.
We've mentioned like, oh my goodness, what if China gets these technologies and Russia gets them, and what if it's a threat to us? And that always makes me think about Native Americans encountering European powers, hundreds of years ago. And what happened is all the tribes kept warring amongst themselves, and the colonial powers could just play one against the other and make alliances with one and slaughter the other, and so on. It was a frightening tale of cooperating in your own demise, right? And I think that we're potentially in a similar kind of situation with apparently technologically superior entities or beings, and we should be mindful of that history lesson, and think that China shouldn't be an enemy; it should be a friend until we understand what it is we're dealing with. And same with Russia. I also think, getting back to your question about catastrophic disclosure, is it would be a catastrophe depending upon what the reality is. If the government knows a lot about it, like if, oh my God, like they know that these non-human intelligent beings are out to eat us, to devour us, right? I mean, then yeah, you bet. Like if that comes out, that's gonna probably spark a lot of disruption. If, however, they end up saying, you know what, we've been watching these things and interacting with them for 80 years. And yeah, there's this bad actor over here, but these are good, and there's a relationship, and don't worry, like we've got a stable relationship with them, and so on. It's like, okay, maybe I'll sign that 30-year mortgage tomorrow, right? So it's we don't have to like assume that the disclosure is going to be catastrophic. It's going to depend on what we learn about whatever is visiting us, that will determine what we're up against, what we're dealing with. And maybe the government doesn't know all that yet, but I just keep saying that, yeah, that's a risk, but you don't want to not do something because of that risk. We gotta face up to whatever reality is. We gotta face up to it. Is where I end up coming down. Even if some of the consequences are not great, do you want to face it now, or do you want to face it some other time? I don't know.
But there's been some really bad terrestrial wars, so it doesn't seem like it's worse than that. So and even if we do find out that there are threats that they haven't shared with us, that's kind of a normal expectation with terrestrial threats, that a lot of those threats are not shared. Especially in the Virginia area, and there's a lot of people, and they're on high alert all the time. The rest of us are just kind of walking around, and not a problem, type thing. So we often don't know about the threats.
You mean people out in the hinterlands? Is that what you mean?
No, I mean, when there's security threats, potentially against the country, I mean, those are not typically being communicated. It's only
to the rest of the country. That's
yeah.
That's right.
So sometimes you get told you're on high alert, but
Maybe a second very practical question is, actually our lab right now is supported by National Science Foundation. surviving from the funding cut of Trump administration. So my question would be like, regarding
Sorry, I'm not with, I didn't realize this was written this way, so I just want to make clear, I'm not currently with the National Science Foundation. I'm the founder of American DeepTech.
I see. But my general question would be like, let's say for the UAP research, what's an easier way, more accessible way to get like funding support?
Well, so with any way of going to, so I think when you're going to capital providers, really just trying to understand, whether it's a philanthropist, whether it's a corporation, whether it's a financial institution, a venture capitalist, just what are their objectives, and what are the profiles that they're looking for. So some people, they might be, seeking impact or seeking to learn, and many investors are looking for an ROI. So one of the things that's been very straightforward to us was we knew that we had to look at the potential for UAP technology because our mandate was that we needed to focus on getting the most advanced energy and space technologies. So I would say putting it inside the why this matters, and then finding the people that want to invest in that because it fits their profile of what they're trying to do, or what their financial return or other return is that they're looking at for that capital.
I think he was also asking about NSF. So
oh, at NSF? So, I think that the great thing about the National Science Foundation is NSF is, are you asking academic or business?
Both, general.
Yeah, so just in general, NSF is open to all fields of science and technology. I think that they have also, under the current administration, you look on the website in terms of what some additional areas of focus. So a lot of the agencies have been given specific mandates. Earlier in the year, I think there was focus on AI, quantum, and biotechnology. But so there are some fields that the administration, you'd have to check what the areas of priority are, but NSF is open to everything. So really showing why there's transformative scientific breakthrough and also the societal impact. So on the business side, we would look at what's the innovation component, so which is also from a business standpoint, competitive advantage, disruption to market, what's the societal impact, which is beneficial, and then what's the commercial impact, advantage, why is this going to be successful?
It's 9 o'clock. I think we should probably call it. But I wanted to, Sri, unless you disagree or if there's another question.
Yeah, so Sydney, the founder of the club, is right here, so none of this would have happened without Sydney, so at least I'll want her to.
Of course.
If she wants.
It's slightly funny, or I wouldn't urge it, but YSUS can be like a pro-dragon space on campus. In fact, I think the ability for human beings to adapt is what college is all about. You have 18-year-olds coming in. They're supposed to change very fast, and I think if we have professors who after almost 2 years have used the same dragon line, even after I told you in Cherokee culture, dragons are very real, I think I'm never spicy like our 2016 alums were about race issues on campus, but I would say please put that to bed before teaching your UFO class. Or things will get very nasty. We do have a Cherokee president now, so it's a fair warning. And so maybe if anyone has any pretty words to say.
Scientific theory, actually. Well, so first of all, I just want to say I do not have any dragon experience, no dragon experience, no mermaid experience. Bring them to me.
Are you pro-dragon?
No, but one of the things that's actually, when we were talking about the chariots in the sky type thing is, there are people that would say that there's a component of this that is information-based transfer, so the communication of things that are useful at that period of time. There are, so kind of the advanced technologies that are coming in, just like, so whether you believe that it's something that's being built terrestrially, whether you believe it's coming from more advanced civilization, that the prod and what's being offered and the interaction does actually vary over time. So, yes, I am not into dragons, but the idea of combustion, is actually not that exotic. Machines do that, you know, if we wanted to, if we really thought breathing fire was useful, I mean, we have lighters, so I'm pretty sure that that's not actually that exciting.
I think some of those analogies are apropos. I mean, people base their entire lives on religions that have, you know, a fact base that I think is substantially inferior to this topic. But also, how would you, if you have a, you know, orbs are a morphology that's been seen a lot more frequently recently. You know, why do the morphologies of these things change? But orbs have also been seen in throughout history as well. I mean, that's exactly what I think of. I think of the, like, how else would you describe as a Bronze Age desert wanderer? How else would you describe coming upon a, like, glowing plasma orb other than, like, oh, it's a burning bush and it's trying to communicate with me? And I guess the last thing I would add on the dragon on dragons, which is my next philosophical treatise, you know, I would say sort of flip it on its head. If I don't believe in dragons, do I scientifically have to be open-minded to the possibility of dragons? I think so. If I had multi-sensor systems, F-18 pilots that were seeing dragons in the sky, if the dragons were corroborated by multi-sensor, our most advanced radar, if we had people that said that they had dragons in a classified vault in Nevada, if you had whistleblowers coming out to tell you about the dragon programs, and you have all of these, and you have thousands of reports submitted to a government organization whose role it is to investigate the facts around dragons, and they say, we can explain some of these sightings, but with all of our training, you know, we can't rule out dragons here. If that's the fact base, I think we just have to ask ourselves, like, it doesn't have to be dragons. It could be flying elephants, but it's not.
I have seen people breathe fire, so I've not actually been to a party. So, like, in terms of what is a dragon,
but if you had that fact pattern for
parties where that's done. Outdoors.
If you had that fact pattern for anything, it's just call it X. You know, are you intellectually, you have to be in the position of accepting evidence, and there's a pile of evidence for something that we don't understand, and we try to apply names and labels to it, even though we don't know what it is. We sort of have to be comfortable with that, or if you're willing to be intellectually honest and consistent about accepting a given level of, like, evidentiary threshold.
I would also just add to that weight of corroborating evidence of various strengths that not only do you have these more modern data collection systems and eyewitness accounts and government reports, but then you have different cultures for thousands of years separated from time and space observing dragons. At some point, you have to start looking around and thinking about ourselves, boy, we're not all the smart ones here, are we? And that's a tough thing to admit.
Yeah, so what are the assumptions that we have today that the future is going to laugh at?
Excuse me?
Well, what are the assumptions that we have today that the future is going to laugh at? What are the limitations that we have today that, you know, it's kind of, you know, we could be horse people, you know, kind of ignoring cars. You know, we could be falcon people that would never believe in cell phones. You know, there's so many more advanced technologies that are well beyond what is conceptualized until it's built in habits.
Thank you for that. And that's what YSOS is about, is bringing fun and, like, community lightheartedness into what could be too scary. But I think humans aren't scared of this stuff. That's what I'll end with.
And back to the dragons, there was actually, like, a Discovery Channel fake documentary, maybe like an April Fool's joke about dragons. I saw it when I was 13, and I was convinced until I Googled it. Yeah, so thanks to the speakers, not to end on a dragon note, but UAP is a very serious topic, and thanks for this wonderful marathon session.
Thank you, Shri. Thank you for having us.
I've also seen people take fire shots at griffins, and I would not suggest.
Thank you all for showing up and staying for a while.
Thank you.
And stuck with it.
And this is exactly the kind of like conversation we need. Thank you.